As soon as the main character's boyfriend got married, divorce was acceptable. Betrayal was also familiar. However, it is difficult to come to terms with what belonged to her. My younger sister took it again. She wasn't going to give up and kept going anyway. The former young man tried to explain that he knew well how difficult it would be for her to accept his decision, but it was also difficult for him. She tried to understand everything as she looked into his sad eyes and didn't even want him to continue to explain something, but it was still interesting who his new chosen one was. The young man just silently looked at his former bride, but did not know what to answer her. After learning the whole truth, the girl simply could not believe what she heard. She kept asking the same question in her mind. Why exactly was she? Not wanting to hear anything more from him, she wanted to just leave that room, but the boy grabbed her hand and wouldn't let go. The heroine simply fell to her knees. Her tears just rolled down her cute face, and she didn't know what to do next. It was this man who was her fiancé just a month ago, and everything was fine between them. But quite quickly, everything changed, and now he has to marry a completely different woman. Having calmed down a little, she decided to pull herself together and finally leave the girls' restroom. It was not the first time that she felt betrayal on herself, because it was done to her quite a few times, and it all started from childhood. The little girl remembered how she looked at the portrait of her late mother, and did not understand at all why she left her. Very soon the child learned that she needed to get used to the new mother, whom her father managed to bring to their home. The father wanted to marry this woman, who was responsible for the death of the main character's mother. The man really wanted Yemen to say hello to her new sister and insisted that she treat her very well. Yemen didn't like the new sister very much, and immediately wanted to take away her favorite toy from the girl. No matter how much the woman tried to calm her daughter down, she still insisted on her new sister's toy. Yemen hugged the hair tightly and cried bitterly. She could not give away her favorite toy, which was given to her by her late mother. But the father did not consider the feelings of his own daughter at all. He took the toy by force and thought that she was too hard on the new baby sister. Yemen's father really wanted to please the new woman and her child. All three of them were having a lot of fun, and no one paid any attention to another child. Mala was satisfied and thought that they could definitely get along in the future, but this was only the beginning. Over time, as the children began to grow up, the sister tried to take away from Yemen everything that did not belong to her at all. As soon as the main character became an adult, she immediately decided that she needed to run away from home and become independent from her family. Very soon she had a boyfriend. But Yemen was a person who could not think about any relationship and therefore did not know how to open up to people at all. But his stubbornness and courtship made him open the heroine's heart. Then, at dinner, she confessed everything to her family. The stepmother was not at all delighted with what she heard. She wanted to know a little more information about the girl's boyfriend. The sister generally believed that Yemen was a very cunning fox, and she always pretended to be an innocent sheep in public. The father knew well that the suitor was quite talented, managed to beat his rival, and won the heart of the president himself. She was a little upset, but still admitted that they wanted to get married soon enough, and he would come by to say hi to everyone soon. But for a moment, it seemed like she made a big mistake in admitting it. Later, the family again took everything that the heroine had, even the young man who married her sister, not her. Now she really didn't know what to do and where to go next. There were a lot of thoughts in her head that she couldn't deal with. At that moment, when she was only in her thoughts, there was a collision with a man who tried to address her. He looked straight into her eyes and wanted to know what such a beautiful lady could be thinking about, that she didn't even see where she was going. In front of the main character was the manager, who was the nephew of the head of the group. He was the head of the inventive part and development where the girl worked. The young man was also a relative of her ex-boyfriend, as well as his only enemy. They did not like each other at all. At that moment, an unfamiliar girl joined them, and it was immediately clear that the boy had come on a date. She began to apologize quietly, tears filling her eyes. It seemed to her that she had overworked herself, so she said goodbye and promised to meet at work the next day. It was in a fit of anger that she boarded a completely different bus and arrived at an unfamiliar place. Now she definitely does not know where to go and what to do. Having bought herself a little drink, the girl regained her strength and began to remember when, after all, the problems in their relationship with the groom began. One day, after picking her up after work, their conversation was interrupted by a call from her sister, but it was not at all clear why her voice was so friendly. During the conversation, it was very strange that she wanted to meet since they both hadn't seen each other for quite some time, and even wanted to sit with her in a cafe. But Yemen immediately hung up the phone without even listening to it to the very end. She believed that they definitely did not need to see each other. The young man immediately noticed that his girlfriend communicated very coldly with her sister. There was a moment that he even thought that they had a bad family. The groom believed that a helping hand was extended to her to improve their relationship, and therefore a mature girl should not behave exactly the way she did. It seemed to him that Yemen should have told everything personally to her relatives about their relationship in order to see their smiles and joy, as well as to receive their blessings. At that moment, she even agreed, as she believed that he was the only one for life and she had to listen to him. But even then, her lover was dating her sister. The girl had a very angry reaction when she heard that Yemen was going to marry Kim. It was from that moment that the ex-fiancé and the heroine's sister were in a relationship, but they hid everything. At that moment, her director appeared in front of her again, who believed that she was still lost and wanted to help when he happened to drive by. She had to admit that she confused the transport and ended up in an unfamiliar place, but she was very ashamed and did not want him to distract her. The man decided to admit that she had been bothering him from the very beginning, so he decided to approach her and find out what was going on with her. In his opinion, he decided that the girl did not ask for help at all, although it was clear that the help itself would not have hindered her at all. Sitting next to him, Yemen admitted that no one was able to help her, so she didn't even ask for a ride home. She insisted that he still left her and went about his business. It seemed to her that all her hope had disappeared and her strength had left her long ago. But the manager still stood his ground. He insisted that she get up and walk to his car and promised that he had no intention of cheating on her. His eyes looked at her gently and intently. First of all, he came to her just to give her a ride home. Very soon she accepted and agreed to his proposal, but where he was taking her was not known. To cheer up his companion a little, the young man even started joking that he would take her to the hotel and take advantage of her fortune. For a moment, she began to think and remember the rumors that once circulated about her manager, but at that time no attention was paid to this at all. He was fond of going to various clubs in America, where the atmosphere of beautiful girls, alcohol, and drugs reigned. And the head of the company, his uncle, was very tired of such pranks of his nephew, as well as various relationships with the opposite sex, so he forcibly transported the boy to Korea. Now that Yemen remembered everything, the girl with whom she saw her director was not at all the one she met last week in his company. She even assumed that it was her mistake to get into his car, even in a drunken state. But he remembered well everything that Yemen had told him before, so he understood well that it was necessary to go to the villa where she lived. It was clear to Yemen that the man really wanted to help and was trying to take her home, and she immediately thought of God knows what. If he really wanted to use her, he would have taken her to the hotel right away and not started promoting all his interesting tricks, so he wanted the girl to calm down about this. But she always saw that he was constantly staying in hotels and changing his partners, and therefore she believed that he definitely had no reason to give his colleague a lift out of kindness. The manager was very surprised when he heard that the girl was referring to all his things and the people who were always near him. She looked a little tired, but she continued the conversation and even pointed out that she remembered his tie because she liked it so much. She was going to give this one to her fiancé. Yemen was very surprised when she heard that he was aware that her boyfriend left her and decided to marry another girl, and also left a wedding invitation for him. All this was quite offensive for her. The girl did not understand at all why he was interested in her story, because the manager had his own dates and a bunch of girls. Their conversation was interrupted by a call from the office. The chairman was not at all pleased that his nephew was not already there. On the phone was her director's uncle Yunhwan. He was the head of the group where they all worked. The young people heard that the man was very angry and did not stop shouting into the receiver. He also really didn't like that his nephew was in the development team. The girl tried to apologize, as she did not understand everything correctly, but the man did not care much. Besides, they were already approaching her house. At that moment, he gently took her hand and did not want her to leave his company, and also decided to lead her directly to the door so that she would not walk alone in the dark street. Leaving his car, Yemen bowed her head and wanted to thank her manager for the evening. The little girl sat on his lap and did not stop crying, at that moment when the young man did not know what he could really do to help her. Suddenly she changed her mind and returned to the boy's car. Still, for some reason, she wondered if he was ready to marry someone now. He was very surprised by his girlfriend's question, and he was even a little stunned and also did not know what to answer. But she decided to finish her conversation and immediately proposed that he marry her. The director simply could not believe what he had to hear, but wanted to ask again if she was really ready for that. He began to get closer to her face, and he certainly did not smell alcohol anymore, so it was even possible to assume that she said this while sober. It even seemed to him that the girl did not know enough about him, since she did not see at all that the tie was different from the one he was wearing the previous day. Therefore, he gently stroked her head and wanted her to go home and rest, and they could definitely discuss everything the next day. As soon as she found herself at home on her bed, she immediately began to think, however, that on that very day she had the feeling that she was back in her childhood. When she was only 9, it was Yuna's nephew who often came to their house, since the chairman and her grandfather were close friends. It was that young man who always tried to comfort the sweet girl when she cried and tried to wipe her tears every time. The boy knew very well that she had been sitting on that lawn since the morning and hadn't even eaten anything, and to cheer her up a little, he took her toy back from her sister again. He was ready to give the doll to its rightful owner, but he wanted her to promise him that if her sister were to misbehave or offend again, he would definitely know about it. It was necessary to hide the toy well so that next time no one would be able to find it, since the next time the little one is no longer sure whether he will be able to steal it. He really wanted the girl to study well and be much better than her sister. It was in those moments when the young man was next to her that she was sure that he was the only one who understood her heart better than anyone else. She always felt alone and knew that there was no one in that city who would be on her side except her friend. She even thought that she would never be able to see him when he went to America. She couldn't even allow that they would have to work in the same company, and that he didn't even pretend that he didn't know her. From their very first meeting, he extended his hand, introduced himself, and emphasized that they would now work in the same company. The main character's sister has long been in love with Yunhwan's brother. And Kim, at the same time, constantly felt an inferiority complex in relation to the company's leader. Gathering her strength, she decided that she would definitely not involve the manager in her problems, but would figure it out herself. Yemen decided to visit her named mother and sister, who were both sitting in the room and discussing some issues. They looked quite calm, but the mother was even a little unhappy that her daughter had not warned about her visit. The girl immediately decided to get down to business and said that she was aware that Nari was marrying her ex-boyfriend. All this even amused Nara, since she was not even going to justify herself in front of her sister. In fact, Yemen considered Nari the worst of everyone she knew. Even animals are ashamed of all their actions, but she is not. Her calm state ended. She was not at all ready that her sister would treat her so rudely. Yemen tried to find out why she was not invited to the wedding. It is possible that the whole point was precisely that the attention will be concentrated only on her. Later, the mother joined the quarrel. She always believed that her own daughter was better than her husband's daughter, and also believed that it was Nari who was more suitable for Kim as a wife. The door opened, and the father rushed in, who believed that Yemen definitely had no right to talk to her family like that. The girl tried to remind that it was he who deprived her of her own mother, so she's even glad that now she can remember him as the most pitiful among people. As soon as she stepped outside that house, she immediately felt a real sense of relief. For the first time in all these years, she was able to say everything to their faces. When she raised her head, she immediately saw her ex with a bouquet of flowers and a gift that he was already carrying to his new bride. She did not want to talk to him anymore, so she decided to quickly leave her home. But he still managed to catch up with her and tried to find out what she said to her sister that made her cry so incessantly. The man kept shouting that he could not calm down. He forbade entry into his life and emphasized that it was Nari who would become his wife, and he even managed to raise his hand to Yemen. All the time he believed that the girl had a bad family, but now it became clear to him that everything was the opposite and the matter was only in her. Once this young man was the main character's boyfriend, and she even thought that he would always be on her side. But he believed that the girl still had to go through a lot, and therefore did not want her to hurt him. The girl turned away from him, but in the end she still wanted to warn that in fact he did not know anything about her sister at all, but obeyed her like a dog. Now the poor child did not know where to go and what to do. She stood in front of the road and tried to call a taxi to begin with. Very soon she met again with her supervisor, but tried to immediately apologize for calling him at such a late hour. Maybe it all looked pretty weird and sounded even crazier, but for her it was the best way to get revenge. Therefore, she did not wait and again asked the young man to marry her without thinking twice. She assured him that he would definitely not regret it, because he didn't care who he married in order to fulfill his uncle's request. At that moment, she even assured that she considered herself the best candidate among all for a wife. The girl had a good academic education, a job, and was very hospitable. But for him, it was a great surprise that such a girl was ready to devote her life to such a boy as him. He tried to explain that there were always a lot of girls around him and there was a lot of gossip, but it definitely didn't matter to her. Yamin was sure that he was still better than her ex-fiancé who chose her sister, and when he finds out that his ex-fiancé is also getting married, it will knock him a little. The young man was the direct nephew of the head of the company, and he was also more handsome and even taller. It was now clear to him that the girl had found the only way to get revenge on her ex as well as her family. After their conversation, he left his number card and said that if she was really so brave, she could come to his place. Since the girl definitely had no way out, she decided to knock on his door. A young man was sitting in a chair after a shower in a white robe. At first glance, she even thought he looked angry. At that moment, he wanted his girlfriend to somehow convince him to marry her. Yemen tried to explain that she was sure that she would be a good wife, would be a tick, and his uncle would completely stop pressuring him about marriage. She also explained that she definitely won't ask for a lot of attention. The guy tried to hug her, but he didn't really like that he would have to play a role, that they fell deeply in love with each other. He was very pleased to be near her, and in general, he believed that she was definitely suitable for the role of his wife. Her face was simply beautiful, and the young man liked it, and he also knew that her family was well off, and the girl had a good education. The young man began to remove his clothes and warned that he could be a little rude, so he wondered if she could handle it. As soon as he started touching her, he noticed that the girl was not at all ready for such a situation, but since she proposed to marry her, then all this had to happen. The man continued to undress her, but he did it very slowly. She began to feel that her body was starting to burn at that moment. At one point, he even suggested that she undress herself and also help him take off his clothes. But now he wanted to know what she was thinking when she decided to get involved in such a situation, when she became so nervous. Her reaction even made the grown man pale a little and feel like some kind of monster. Dressing immediately, he made it clear that he had invented all this on purpose, since she simply followed him without thinking to reach her goal. She had such an expression on her face, as if a swimmer had jumped into the water, and he even thought that it was quite an interesting experience. He was not at all a fan of forcing someone to do something by force. He offered her tea and wanted to hear what she really wanted, but she wasn't sure she knew the answer to that question. He decided to start with himself, that he would get just the perfect wife and complete freedom of action, but he wanted to know if she would be happy knowing that she was in the place of a fake woman. At that moment, it was important for her to take revenge and seem happy in the eyes of everyone else. In fact, she really didn't know what else could be done or wished for in her situation. All she did all her life was simply put up with everything and everyone. Tears could not be contained in the eyes and rolled down. She remembered that she had a lover, and she held on to him with all her might because she wanted to build a real family, but all she got from him was betrayal. He understood very well that if he refused to help her take revenge, then she would definitely be able to find another candidate for her husband's place. She was very sorry that she managed to involve her manager in that story, but she did not see another way out. I didn't want to detain him any longer. She apologized for the fact that it really wasn't a joke, and she was ready to give him everything and even more that he could wish for. Without thinking, he took her hand and was ready to help Yemen in everything. Now she had to decide when their wedding should take place, before or after her sister's wedding. She continued to lie calmly, not on her bed, and think about all the events that happened in her life, namely about the marriage that she wanted for herself for so long, but unfortunately, everything did not happen as Yemen wanted. Also, the girl remembered the words of the man who clearly emphasized at the time that her choice was only hers, and also that day he had not yet given a few words that could not get out of the woman's head for a long time. Then she was very interested in when exactly the groom wanted to get married, but according to his words. She understood that he would not be seriously ready for this, because he did not clearly name any date. He calmly approached her and emphasized that he was ready to take her as his wife, and as soon as the girl heard about it, she immediately questioned whether he was really ready to take on such a responsibility. With a sincere smile, he emphasized that this situation was quite interesting for him. Therefore, he wanted to deal with her as quickly as possible. After thinking it all over in her head, she didn't realize at first that Yunhwan would agree to her proposal so easily, but unfortunately it still didn't suit her at all. The team leader, in turn, was responsible for development. Then he clearly emphasized that he was not interested in any marriage, because he wasn't ready for it yet. After a second, the director himself dialed her, and without thinking for a long time, she quickly picked up the phone and began to tell how she got home. After some time, she decided to thank her director very much for the fact that he was able to give her a ride home, and for that she was very grateful to him. When they talked a little more, he decided to ask one last question what exactly the girl decided to do, but then she could not clearly say the answer to this question. He, in turn, clearly wanted to know when exactly the girl wanted to celebrate her wedding, but she could not give any answer to this question, because it was quite difficult. Later, she still offered one option and the man liked it, so he could easily organize this holiday, but it was very difficult for the girl to talk about it. He also emphasized that he wanted to see all the faces that treated him very badly in childhood and to show what he has achieved now and what a beautiful bride he had. She enjoyed talking to him quite a bit, but after a while he noticed that Yemen was getting a little worried because she wasn't used to talking to him on the phone for so long. Then they decided to talk about old relatives, because the man noticed that there was another person working in his company who had the same last name as the girl. He emphasized that the situation turned out to be much more interesting than he expected. Therefore, he did not really understand how to do it right, but he thought that it would not be difficult. At the end of the conversation, they agreed that their wedding would take place in 6 months, and the woman in turn immediately agreed because she thought that it was not very important, so at the end she simply thanked. Hanging up, she wondered how she should have recorded it in her phone, because it was still her fiancé who was still signed in the phone as the head of the company. Then he met the girl for the first time at a special party organized by a company he did not know. That evening, he calmly came to the institution and wanted to meet someone. After some time, a stranger flew into him with all her might and fell to her knees, and then he decided to help after all, because he saw how difficult it was for the girl to climb up on her own. Then, in a moment, he noticed some unfamiliar book that he had already seen somewhere and then decided to inquire what exactly the girl liked to read, and she, in turn, also noticed that the man was looking at the book. Calmly talking among themselves, he understood that this stranger was very similar to one of his employees, and she, in turn, emphasized that it was a book by her favorite author. Sitting calmly in his car after such an event, he realized that his friend had never told him that she had sisters of her own, and then he began to wonder why exactly she had never told him about it. She was very pleased that she had such an opportunity to meet her sister's boyfriend that evening, and she also wanted her husband to help her and her sister get closer, because they were not very close. Taking something, he understood that he did not know all the information about his girlfriend, because her sister's stories and her husband's thoughts did not agree with each other at all. When a couple of days passed on the weekend, the man sat quietly in his house, and he also calmly watched the news on which it was reported that a big fire had broken out in the city center. But then he was not very interested in it, because he remembered his childhood, which was not as beautiful as everyone could think, because his mother was sometimes cruel to him. With all the news turned off, he didn't look like himself in this situation, because at first the father was very aggressive towards his wife, and then he got along well. Unfortunately, these childhood memories haunted him for a long time. Remembering the events of how he took the girl to work, Yunhwan initially thought that this was a rather interesting person who would not bring any success to his team, but later he began to be mistaken in his omissions. A second later, the worker quickly opened the door and wanted to say that it was very important, but the man's thoughts broke in one moment, and then an acquaintance informed him that his grandfather had come to him. But when he came a little closer, he realized that it was his close person, but the man did not immediately understand this. Because I haven't seen this person with my own eyes for a long time. Sitting down on the sofa, they calmly talked about their personal lives, and then the husband will be glad that he could talk to his loved one, because it is very difficult to reach him, let alone meet. The leader of the group decided to ask the man if he knew one very interesting person, and then his uncle remarked that he knew this girl very well, because she was the daughter of his acquaintances. When he began to speak only pleasant words about her, then the young man noticed that she was not only his deputy, but upon hearing this, the man was a little confused because he did not expect to hear such a thing. Later, he calmly told that now his uncle had to see this girl much more often. Because of this, he asked him to treat her very politely and not say anything bad. The girl, in turn, rested calmly on her bed and dreamed not very good dreams in her head, because there was one person who did not give her peace. One very unpleasant person constantly said bad words to her. Because of this, she was quite often in the girl's dreams, and therefore did not give her any peace. But at times, there were also good dreams where she saw her fiancé, who calmed her down and made it clear that she was the closest person to him. These thoughts often disturbed her. Because of this, Yemen began to slowly wake up. Because she noticed that the sun had already begun to rise and she had to get up for work. Although she had the role of a false woman, it did not give her any reason to just sit on the spot and do nothing. Therefore, after sorting out her thoughts, she decided that she would fight for her happiness. When she appeared at work, she immediately informed her partner that as soon as she saw the right man, she would immediately hand over all the documents to him, and he, in turn, thanked her very much and wished her a good appetite at lunch. To her surprise, the meeting took much longer than she expected. Therefore, the woman did not know how to react correctly because she lost a lot of hours. Suddenly, she heard a very familiar voice and turned her head to see a man who clearly remarked that she was not to blame for this situation because their partners delayed the meeting. Yemen immediately apologized to him and wished the group leader bon appétit. He, in turn, noticed that the acquaintance was very worried, but he did not understand what it was connected with. Entering the elevator together, she often looked at him with her eyes because she thought that the acquaintance wanted to tell her something, but for some reason he was silent the entire trip and did not say anything. After some time, going down to the very bottom, they decided to go to dinner together, but then the woman was not very prepared for such a meeting in a restaurant. In the beginning, they did not talk very well, and the woman did not understand at all why she got into the car with the man, but after a while, everything started to improve. Yunhwan began to think that Yemen did not yet realize what was really happening because she behaved strangely in such situations, so he decided to calmly discuss everything with her, approaching her a little closer. He said that it was nice that the woman took the first step herself. Therefore, he emphasized again that they had to get married soon. Because of this, he said that now they had every right to have lunch and dinner together, and no one could think anything because they were close people to each other. He still hoped that she herself understood everything perfectly, and after a second the girl confirmed his assumption, but also emphasized that it was difficult for her to behave like that at times. Later, the woman emphasized that they were no longer so close to him, but as soon as he heard this, he emphasized that they could have started their intimacy with a hug. But as soon as she heard it, she immediately began to worry. Because she didn't expect to hear that, that's why the excitement had a negative effect on her. He also recalled that they were quite close friends in childhood. Therefore, they still had a chance to become a good couple and set a good example. Thinking about all this in her head, she calmly looked out the window and did not understand how her life had turned so quickly, because just a few years ago, almost no one knew about her. Also, she quite often recalled memories with her husband from childhood, because as soon as she felt bad, these memories helped her cope with all the difficulties. Arriving for lunch, the woman said that she had to return before the end of this lunch, because she made a promise to her partner, but he was not very interested in it. Therefore, he asked if she wanted something to drink, but she did not know what to say to such words because she did not expect to hear them in her direction. When everyone calmed down, he invited her to discuss their marriage, because he thought that time flies very quickly, and he needed to clearly discuss the details of their relationship. The first thing he wanted to know was whether she planned to send invitations to her family for such a big celebration. Then, lowering her head, she emphasized that the girl still had to do it. Noticing how confused the woman was, he asked if everything was okay with her, and he also wanted to know why she was so uncertain. After talking a little more, she said that she did not really want to rush to propose her parents to come to their wedding, because they have not yet decided on the date of their wedding. After listening to all the words, the man said that in his opinion the girl was very thin, but she, in turn, did not understand why the young man suddenly wanted to talk about it with her. Smiling in her face, he emphasized that there was nothing like that, and he just wanted to talk about something with the girl, but he didn't know how to properly find a topic for dialogue. After calmly listening to this, she did not know what to answer, and then the manager himself informed her that she needed to be more selfish, because she was too right. Looking into her eyes, the man informed her that if she really didn't like a certain situation, then Yemen didn't have to do it if she really didn't want to. She did not understand what her problem was, because I thought that at times she was also selfish and did not always do well with some people. After a second, the man clearly noted that if the woman wanted to be with him in the future, so she had to be tougher and also refuse people more often because she had to listen to herself. she simply shook her head and answered that she completely understood everything, although it was quite difficult for her to introduce herself like that, because she is not used to such a relationship, noticing that the partner has completely put away her utensils. The young man wondered why she did it, because she ate nothing more than a small bird. Later, he offered to feed the girl himself, but she immediately refused such an offer and quickly took her utensils in her hands and began to eat. Calmly analyzing the situation, she continued to enjoy the delicious food and said nothing at all, because she thought that there was nothing more to say at that moment. Meanwhile, the worker was talking to the young man's uncle, and he also noticed that he was very worried and did not expect to hear such news, which almost everyone already knew. At the moment, he proposed a very good idea, namely to call the father of the girl whom his relative wanted so badly to marry. Hearing this, the boy immediately agreed and went to fulfill his task. Having calmly called this man, they began to discuss their usual life and at times the food they liked to taste every day. But after a few minutes, the conversation became more businesslike. Later, he started talking about the man's daughter and quickly emphasized that he wanted to see her as soon as possible and talk to her personally. When he heard that the man himself was not against such a meeting, a smile began to appear on his face, which strongly motivated him to quickly make his plan. After thinking for a while, he decided to tell all the same that his relative wanted to marry the daughter of the man with whom they had just talked, but the interlocutor was not ready for such a thing. Approaching his wife, he didn't even know what to say to her, because he didn't expect to hear such things with his own ears. That's why he just looked at her for a long time and didn't say anything. When his wife heard such shocking news, namely that her daughter wanted to marry a young man whom they had known since childhood, she could not believe her ears. Mother was very impressed, because she understood that it wasn't long before her daughter broke up with one guy and they already wanted to marry another. The man had an assumption that their daughter simply had a spare option, and that is why she decided to do exactly that, but he did not see any problem in this. But the woman still believed that if Yunhwan found out that her daughter had been dating 2 men at once, he would not be very pleased to hear it. After a short conversation, she came to the conclusion that she and her husband needed to tell all this to their daughter's fiancé because they thought it would be right. She in turn thought that nothing bad would happen if they just told the truth. Because of this, they immediately agreed to meet. But unfortunately, Yunhwan was late for some reason. As soon as he saw the parents of his bride, he immediately greeted them politely, because for him they were quite pleasant people with whom you could talk about something. At first he decided to apologize, because he had a very strong schedule that day, and it was difficult for him to keep up with everything. Because of this, the young man decided that they needed to get down to business right away. The woman didn't like him right away, because she thought that the man was too self-confident, but the father reacted normally to this and decided to immediately start a dialogue. Having told everything for his child, he immediately apologized. Because I thought that it was not very nice on her part, but Yunhwan, in turn, was in no hurry to give an answer. Then, raising his head quite high, he emphasized that he knew about their relationship, and he also had to learn about it in not very good circumstances. After hearing all this information, the girl's father decided to ask why he decided to leave such relations, but the young man did not really want to answer this question. And he also emphasized that the girl just worked for his company, and that's why they were quite close. Looking at his watch, he realized that he didn't have much time before he decided to look into the eyes of the bride's parents and ask why they invited him to such a meeting. Not hearing a specific answer to your question, Yunhwan decided to ask the next question and wonder why his parents kept hurting Yemen. When their daughter came home, they decided to talk to her personally, and her mother was very unhappy that Yemen was marrying such a man. She tried to endure all these negative words with her head held high and not react to anything, because she thought that it was inappropriate at that moment. She still continued to talk to her parents, although after such words it was very unpleasant for her to talk to them, because she thought that they did not support her in her choice. Then the conversation began about her own sister, who was not a very nice person for her and quite often made Yemen hurt, and therefore she thought that if she wanted to take her husband away from her sister, she would do it right away. The angry mother was not ready to hear this from her side, because she thought that her daughter would never say this to her face, so she did not know how to answer her correctly. After some time, she emphasized that it was quite late, and she wanted her parents to leave her house as soon as possible, because she wanted to rest. But this did not stop the mother in any way, and after a second, she made a rather strong blow to her daughter's face, and then the girl simply bowed her head and did not know what to do. Getting to her feet, she again noticed that they quickly swept out of her apartment. because she had no right to be here that day. Quite a lot changed on both sides. Remembering this bad situation, the young man remarked that no matter how bad parents they were, this should not be done under any circumstances. And he also realized that they had not changed at all. Looking once more in their direction, he remarked that Yemen would be his wife in any case, and even if her parents didn't like it, they had no right to change her decision at all. Later, the woman still decided to apologize to her daughter's new fiancé, but still she never hid her hatred for him. Getting up from his chair, he emphasized that he had to go, and he didn't have time to talk about some unnecessary things that he considered unimportant. In the end, he remarked that he no longer wanted to meet like that, and also emphasized that he always knew about the events that they wanted to talk about so much. As soon as she heard that her manager had entered the room again, she asked how he was doing, and also wanted to know how his meeting, which took place recently, went. Approaching her closer, he emphasized that he smelled a beautiful aroma of some delicious drink with his nose, and then the girl was a little surprised. Later, he asked her to release all her affairs for the weekend. Yemen, in turn, immediately agreed, but also wanted to know why she needed to do this. Taking a cup of a delicious drink in his hands, he said that they had to have a special excursion that they had to go through together in order to become a little closer. She was quite surprised by such news, because she also heard that the excursion was supposed to take place at their house, but she thought that her manager did not have any accommodation. Then the man said that actually his uncle had given him this beautiful estate a long, long time ago, but he had one condition, namely that he wanted them to live together in it until the beginning of their marriage. As soon as they went on a tour of the new house, the first thing the man did was to ask if she liked everything. But then Yemen was so enchanted by this beauty that she did not know what to answer. Finally, he wanted to inquire whether they could stay in this apartment, but the girl wanted to know the husband's opinion, but as it turned out, he did not care at all where to live. After talking a little more, he asked her to pack her bags as soon as possible and move to a new house, but then the woman wanted to know if it was necessary to do it all so quickly. Then he said that it was not so important and wanted to say that she could take her time with the move after all, because she had quite a lot of time to properly pack her things. They continued to walk around this beautiful residence, because they understood that there were quite a lot of rooms to walk through. At the moment, Yemen wondered if they had to live in the same room or in different ones, because for her it was a very important issue that she wanted to discuss. She was worried for a long time to hear her husband's answer, because I understood that he might not like something, and their opinions could simply diverge at a moment's notice. He was not going to answer this question in any way, so he simply ignored it, and also simply noted that he liked this building and that it was quite cozy. When they moved to a new room, then only the man said that he was not going to live in the same room with the girl, because he saw how worried she was. She didn't like such words, because she thought that Yunhwan didn't treat her very politely then, and didn't speak his mind. Smiling slyly, he wanted to somehow calm her down because he realized that he really didn't want to offend her, but without realizing it, he did it together with the girl. Meanwhile, at work, a co-worker asked where the woman got the wedding ring that was on her finger for quite a long time, and only then did she emphasize that she broke up with her husband. After thinking for a while, she decided to inquire what had happened to them, because she thought that they were a good enough family that could be set as an example. Yemen did not really want to answer this personal question at that moment because she had no desire to talk about this situation, because it was quite painful for her. Trying to work hard enough, she did not even notice how a colleague approached her and immediately offered to drink coffee. He noticed that she looked a little bad that day. He even offered to take her home and prepare something for her to eat. Soon her manager called her to him and immediately began to inquire about the investigation, which he asked to be prepared last time. After discussing all the working points, the manager immediately emphasized that it was possible to get together and go home together, as they will now live together. He actually really didn't like it when she didn't call him by his first name. Therefore, he even warned that if he did not stop doing this, he would start forcing her to do what she did not want. As soon as she heard what gentle name she would have to call him, she immediately decided that he was definitely just mocking her. It was a real surprise for her when they came to a chic place where they had to choose a ring for her. All samples that were offered were exclusively imported. The heroine's eyes just started to widen from that beauty. The young people quickly made up their minds, but now it was their turn to choose a ring specifically for the groom. The woman hastened to inform that all men's rings were sold out, so it was necessary to make a pre-order and wait a week, but the guy immediately agreed. In fact, she was very pleased that such a beautiful engagement ring was only for her, but it even made her feel guilty. As they headed home, the groom immediately announced that he really wanted to tell everyone that they were now a couple. He believed that it was necessary for everyone to know that Yamin still chose a good enough and pleasant man than her ex. As soon as he realized that the girl was ready to somehow thank him for such a gift, he immediately pointed to her cheek and waited for a small kiss. She gently leaned against him and kissed him. But for him, it turned out to be a little too small and even childish. The man considered her still a real child, so he decided to take matters into his own hands. He gently held her face and began to kiss exactly the way he wanted. The young man could no longer stop, even though it was their fictitious marriage, but the girl was actually very attractive to him. She was also not at all against their close relationship, because their interests exactly coincided. He really liked her answer. At that moment, she stopped everything and how she didn't want it to happen there, but he wasn't going to go to the end at all, so there was definitely no need to be nervous. Yemen was a little scared. She understood well that they would have to share their feelings, and therefore decided that she would cross the line first. The sister's fiancé was sitting on the sofa and was dreaming about something, at the moment when his girlfriend offered to look at her wedding dress. There were a lot of different thoughts in his head, but he tried to agree with the women that this particular dress was much better than the previous one. It seemed to her that he had been very tired at work lately, and that's why he behaved like that, so she immediately suggested that he stop there. In fact, the girl didn't care. She was only pleased by the thought that this particular boy got only her and not her sister. That was the most important thing for her. She remembered that she had hated her sister Yemen since their childhood, so even if she was gone, then all the people would not be able to discuss her. Yemen could always dissolve her tears and always tried to look coldly from top to bottom. As soon as the woman noticed the girl in the dress, she immediately complimented her. It was thanks to such light skin that it sat quite well on her, and she hoped that her husband would definitely like it. The girl enjoyed her appearance and believed that she had definitely taken the best candidate for her groom. But next to her, she imagined it was Yunhwan, but she couldn't do anything with him. The bridegroom thought that the dress really suited her, so without wasting time on thinking, it was necessary to take it. She knew that since her fiancé was not as handsome as Yoon, but he was the first closer to the place of the head of the group's host, and she hoped that he would be a good husband for her. But he had rather strange feelings. He did not even understand what was happening to him. It was important for him to know if he really made a mistake with his choice. At that moment, he began to assure himself that he really loved Nari, and she was definitely many times better than her sister Yemen, whom he left. When Yoon and Yemen came to the cinema, the girl tried to look directly into his face during each scary scene. She had to admit that when choosing a horror film, she wanted to see the boys' reaction to scary scenes, but nothing happened. In fact, she was very interested to hear the opinion of her fiancé and how it turned out that the blood they saw in the movie definitely did not scare him in any way, because it was not real. Yoon tried to explain that he saw real blood just when his mother was about to kill herself. On that day, the girl could not even think that such a romance would happen between them. Yamin still guessed that there was such a secret in his family, but she couldn't be the first to talk about it. When they were both small, the young man often told her about his mother. He was probably as lonely as she was. But they decided to stop the sad conversations, but Yemen still couldn't get the story about his mother out of her head. It seemed to the girl for a moment that their meeting was exactly like a real date, but then she decided that she was imagining things too much. Later, she decided to ask if Yoon was offended that a completely different person had been promoted instead of him, and he had not. The man believed that rejoicing in useless things was very exhausting from the inside, and he really didn't care about most of what happened in their organization. It seemed to him that there were things in life that could be considered much more important. As soon as they arrived at the restaurant, Yemen thought that her fiancé was actually quite calm and confident in handling all the problems. It was in the middle of the restaurant that the girl noticed that Yemen, her sister, was sitting at the next table and could not miss the opportunity not to approach her. Yemen felt a little embarrassed. She even thought that her sister definitely knew about her wedding and did not want to start any conversations with her at all. The girl immediately started her bullying. She couldn't even help herself not to remember her ex, who still left Yemen. But Yemen immediately noticed and reported that she understood her sister's jealousy well, precisely because everyone around her considered her higher and much more beautiful, and Yemen also had a much better education. She was really sorry and not happy to hear such words addressed to her. In life, she could not think that she would hear such a thing from her sister. The heroine was even pleased to make fun of her sister, who had been doing the same thing with her all her life. At that moment, Yemin's ex appeared and decided that she had once again started driving his current fiancée to a nervous breakdown. Without thinking, the man grabbed the girl by the shoulders and began to shake her. He wanted to remind her that he had already warned her not to interfere with them under any circumstances. But everything stopped quite quickly. Yoon stormed into the restaurant and put Yemen's ex face down on the floor, protecting his fiancée. He tried to scream as hard as he could to be let go, but he definitely couldn't get out on his own. Yoon immediately turned back to his girlfriend to see if she was okay. Everyone around was very surprised by the situation that happened, but their conversation was definitely not over yet, so the manager grabbed him by the tie and wanted to continue it on the street. The young man did not understand at all why the manager attacked him like that. He even began to threaten that he would definitely not get away with it just like that. Now he could confidently order that scoundrel to go to his girlfriend, fall at her feet and beg for forgiveness. Their conversation was definitely not a pleasant one, but Yoon really didn't like Kim because he was constantly spreading nasty rumors. He knew everything well about every step and word of Kim. Therefore, he warned him to be very careful. While their husbands were not there, the sister wanted to find out from Yemen what her manager was doing there, because she was not yet aware that they were together. She even caught herself thinking that she was angry precisely because she could think of any relationship between Yemen and Yoon. As soon as she saw him, she immediately ran to meet him to find out if he was all right. As always, he was calm and now really wanted to proceed to order and eat in peace. His only regret was that he had stopped with Kim early enough, but his girlfriend was absolutely delighted with what he had done for her. Yemin thought that her boyfriend was just playing a good role and thought that it was not real at all, but she was wrong. Yunhwan immediately interrupted her and emphasized that he would never allow anyone to touch what belonged only to him. The same applied to his future wife. He also really didn't want his girlfriend to grimace in front of her lousy sister and her fiancé. In fact, the man really wanted her to turn to him immediately, as soon as someone offended her or something might not work out for her. At the end of the conversation, it still became clear to her that she was his future wife, and she had to try to behave as she should from that moment on. But he believed that this was not the case and wanted her to behave calmly and exactly as she would like, but if something did not work out, to call him. At that moment, she began to get nervous as she understood that Kim had been promoted, and now her fiancé had to obey him. Now the young people could enjoy a delicious lunch and put all other work-related conversations on hold. While they were driving in the car, the girl still couldn't calm down and didn't understand where Yun could be in the restaurant, since he always dined alone. But her sister was also there. She really hoped that Yemen hadn't started dating Yunhwan, and she also pushed away the thoughts that it was he who could just stand up for her in that restaurant. Meanwhile, Kim kept thinking that Yoon really knew a lot about him and could pretend so easily all the time. But later, he decided that he made it up for himself. He decided that he had always disliked Yunhwan and used that incident as an excuse to take out his anger on him. He even had the look on Yemen's face when he grabbed her so hard and realized that he had really hurt her enough, but he did it so that she wouldn't interfere in his life. They just drove in silence. Everyone was in their own thoughts and thinking about their own, but Kim was definitely sure that he needed to apologize to Yemen. The heroine felt very tired but understood that it was necessary to pack her things for the move. Her rest was suddenly interrupted by the groom, who tried to call her to find out if everything was normal. But she was mistaken. It was Kim calling. He wanted to discuss something with her. Yemen was simply stunned that he had the audacity to call her after he had drunk. The young man began to beg the girl to listen to him. He said that when he saw Nari in a wedding dress, he immediately imagined her, and it hurt him very much. She didn't expect to hear that, but she thought that there was definitely no need to feel sorry for her, and she also didn't want him to call her. Yemen realized that the ex started regretting something even before the wedding. His voice was shaking, and he was full of pity for his decision. But when she saw that her manager was trying to call her, her mood began to lift a little. She sat quietly and continued talking to her manager on the phone, and she was quite surprised how he reacted to her life situations. And she, in turn, noted that she was very sorry that the head of her company worked so long even on such a difficult day. But it did not bother him much. Later, their conversation became more serious, and the girl was very interested to know how the man planned their social life if they will live together. Yunhwan started talking about different money, but the girl started laughing, because she emphasized that she was not interested in it at all, and she believed that she was not meeting him for money. He was pleased to hear such pleasant words, so he clearly emphasized that he really wanted to see himself together with a woman in real life. After some time, she emphasized that she wanted to take a break already and also wanted to go to bed, because tomorrow she must have a hard day. At that moment, he became interested with whom Yemen was talking to him, but she clearly did not expect to hear such a question and did not understand why he was so interested in it. When she went down to another room only, then she informed who she was talking to, but was surprised when she heard almost nothing in response, only silence. The young man was very surprised, because he considered this person with whom the girl recently talked very bad, and he wanted to know what exactly she said to him when they talked together. The lady didn't really want to talk about it, so she made it clear that she really didn't want to talk about it at that moment, because she was in a bad mood. The man decided to continue their conversation anyway, because he still wanted to know about this secret conversation with the bad man, but he believed that he was not in his right mind. After a while, she asked very much that her husband should not worry about her condition, because she believed that she was quite a smart person and clearly understood what to do and how to talk to bad people. After some time, they still decided to meet again, and this time, the man suggested a walk around the shopping center where there were quite a lot of people. He offered to take the girl for a walk in good shops and buy her very expensive clothes, although for the man himself it was not some cosmic money. Calmly walking around the shops, after some time they decided to go to another place, and then the man politely opened the door for her so that the girl could leave. At that moment she had a lot of packages on her hand, and she wanted Yunhwan to help her somehow, and also thanked him very much for such a gift. Yemen, in turn, continued to say thank you to her husband, because she knew how much everything he bought her cost, and because of that she was incredibly grateful to him. At that moment the young man decided to grab some packages from her hands, and then she did not quite understand why he did such an act to her, but decided to just keep silent. Approaching their door, the man suddenly thought that the girl was constantly hiding something from him, and then he decided to ask directly what happened to her. As it turned out, the girl simply could not at that moment open the code that was on the door and then noticing the situation. He decided to help anyway. In a moment, she noticed that now they did not live together. Therefore, she did not have to do everything the man said, and she could also not accept his gifts. He still decided to apologize to her, and then she was incredibly pleased and told him that she would call him every time he wanted to. The woman, in turn, thought that he would quickly get bored of such an attitude, but smiling in response, he remarked that he really liked to communicate like that. When she did open her door, she quickly entered the house, but the man stood at the threshold for a while and thought that the thought that came to his mind was correct. And in a second, he decided to kiss the girl he wanted to tame for so long, and when they had their first kiss, he couldn't believe his feelings. Taking a step back, he was very pleased that they slowly began to get closer to the girl, and he also smiled for a long time, looking into her eyes. After some time, he noticed that the girl was still standing by the door. The young man asked that she come to her home and rest normally after such a day. As soon as the door closed, she quickly sat down next to them and could not believe that everything was happening so quickly in her life, and at times it seemed to her that it was not happening to her. What scared her the most was that she didn't know what it could lead to, and that's why she even wanted to cry at the moment. Because this unfamiliarity scared her a lot. When some time came and it became easier for her to perceive all these events, she quickly decided to take a shower and take a bath in order to relax at least a little after such a day. Sitting on her bed, she wanted to think about why the manager behaved so romantically, and she also wondered if he talked and behaved like that with all the girls. Sometimes even bad thoughts came to her, because she did not know what to expect from her partner, and also often remembered her unsuccessful experience in the past. When she heard that some strange person wanted to come to her, she didn't know how to react, because every minute the girl asked Yemen to let her go. Opening the door, she asked if the woman was all right, because she did not understand why she was knocking so hard on her door, and also noticed that it was already late at night in the yard. After a second, the person still invited her old colleague to her room, as it turned out that a close person wanted to discuss what she had heard about their marriage with her husband. Strongly grabbing her by the shoulders, she informed that she liked the head of this company a long, long time ago, and she did not want them to get married. Hearing such words, she quickly decided to push back the hands that the girl was putting on her shoulders, but she didn't really know what to say to her in response. Hearing all this, Yemen reported that the girl did not treat her very politely at the moment, namely when she took her husband away from her. Therefore, because of this, she had no feelings for her acquaintance. In response, she decided to tell quite a lot of her stories from her childhood, which showed how difficult life was for her since birth, but this did not affect Yemen's opinion in any way. She believed that such an act could 100% fully show why exactly she decided to act in such a situation, although she herself realized that it was not very polite, but the girl was not going to stop screaming. Realizing that she will not be able to talk to her relative normally, she decided to inform her that she will not change her decision and will deal with her life herself. At the moment, she even managed to recall many phrases that the girl said to her in difficult times, and in this way, she could greatly influence her emotional state. In the end, she still decided to ask whether Yemen did this on purpose to at least somehow take revenge for her bad deeds, but she never heard an answer. After some time, the acquaintance gathered her thoughts and told the girl that she was getting married because she loved this man, and after these words she felt as if she had been hit with a hammer. After a moment, she started screaming and laughing loudly, because she thought that Yunhwan would never be able to love such a terrible girl, but those words did not affect her opinion in any way. Looking into her eyes, she clearly addressed her and informed her that her words now had no meaning for her, and she thought that she had to defend her rights. And in the meantime, when the girl did put her out the door, she began to remember a certain man who played a significant role for her in this life. Then he just wanted to come to his acquaintance and have a quiet chat. Therefore, I politely knocked on the door and waited for an answer. Meanwhile, the girl continued to sit on the chair and did not know what to do, because although she tried to defend her rights, the bad words still affected her a little. Recalling events from her life, she remembered a person who was very important to her, and in the last minutes of her life she said that the girl was incredibly beautiful in this world. Her daughter, in turn, could not hold back tears, because she saw how bad her mother was, but at the same time fully understood that she could not help her in this situation. In the present tense, she was completely convinced that then it was necessary to take her mother's hand and at least somehow support her, because she loved her very much. Noticing that someone called her on the phone, she realized that if she picked up the phone, she would immediately start crying, so she decided to keep her emotions to herself. When she picked up the phone, it turned out to be the manager, and then she asked what had happened to him, but as it turned out, he just wanted to know what happened to his bride at that moment. Hearing her talk, he immediately understood that something was wrong, although the bride decided to deny it and said that she was fine, and therefore decided to end this conversation. A second later, she heard a very loud knock on her door. Therefore, she decided to open them and saw her husband in front of her again. The first thing he did was ask if he could go into the house and see how bad his girlfriend was. She let him into her home without any hesitation. At first, Yemen decided to inquire why Yunhwan came to her so late. Namely, it was already dark a long time ago, and the girl was scared at times. Turning his head in her direction, he wanted to know what had happened to her, because he continued to see an agitated face that always confused him. Lowering his beautiful eyes, she didn't want to answer this question, but her husband insisted because he saw that something was wrong with her, and then the girl started talking. He also remarked that he would like to pretend that he didn't notice anything, but he couldn't because he saw how excited his future wife was. Then she decided that she would completely try to make sure that her fiancé was not nervous at all, because she did not want anything to happen to her husband. Yemen's biggest fear was that after some time the man would simply not want to marry her, but he shattered her assumptions in one moment because he was not going to change anything. He continued to talk about his thoughts because at times they disturbed him very much. Because of this, he wanted to fully express himself to his other half. At times, he thought that the woman was very cunning with him, because she always brought the situation to the point where they started kissing, but she, in turn, denied it. In a second, he still decided to kiss her because he believed that this was exactly the moment when it should be done, but the girl did not count on this at all. He didn't really understand why his other half was so nervous in such situations, so he decided to calm her down because she didn't think anything bad about him. And later he continued to kiss her body because he thought that the girl liked it very much, and she, in turn, could not say a word because she did not know what would happen next. At times she felt very strange, but at times she felt her body begin to just relax in his arms, and she also began to feel much calmer. When he saw that she woke up again, he insisted that the girl go to sleep, because he thought it was still early enough for her to get up for work. A few hours later, when she woke up, she felt that her body was in a lot of pain, as if someone had just beaten her constantly at night, but the girl thought that she still needed to get to work, Barely opening one eye, she noticed the phone lying on the floor as well as the time, and understood that she was late for work. Noticing that his bride-to-be was awake, he said that he had almost prepared breakfast and everything was prepared on the table, only the porridge needed to be heated. The girl felt very uncomfortable at such moments because she thought that she was like some small child who simply could not take care of herself. Therefore, she decided that she would need to thank him somehow for this. And later she reported that she still had to get up for work, but the manager said that she was on sick leave from that day, and he will take care of everything. The man said that he would come to her as soon as he finished work because he had a lot of work today, and she, in turn, simply agreed because she liked it. Getting up from the bed, she held her head and realized that when some time passed, she really wanted to see him with her own eyes because she simply could not live without him. After a while, she heard the door open, and then Yemen quickly jumped out of bed and asked if the man had come from work, but a second later she noticed him in her room. Then Yemen wanted to know how he managed to enter her apartment, because she never gave anyone the password to her door, and the husband told his turn that the girl talked about him in her dreams all night. After talking for a while, he asked if she was very tired. Then the girl looked at her supervisor with surprise, because she did not really understand why he asked her this. After some time, he still continued to express his thoughts and what he thinks about some situations, but the girl did not like it very much, because she saw how excited the man was. She continued to listen to him because she wanted to support him as best as possible, because for her this person now played a very important role in her life. After some time, he himself decided to ask her some things that worried him so much, and later he just gently covered her with a blanket and wanted her to rest. She in turn really liked that so much attention was paid to her, but at times it did not suit her very well because it was sometimes too much. After what happened between them, the man decided to ask something else, because he thought that the girl did not like something and he could somehow harm her. Then she calmly emphasized that everything was fine with her and she did not regret or worry about anything at all, although her husband did not think so. She liked that when she talked about her problems, her husband clearly listened to her and gave some normal advice, and also supported, but it still did not put her in a good mood. After hearing some more words from the girl, he asked her to talk about her problems earlier next time, because he didn't like that there were any secrets between them. At the moment, she herself felt a little uncomfortable, because she realized that she could have offended him with such actions, but the man continued to remark that everything was fine. Looking into his eyes, she noticed how much he was really interested in listening to her problems, and the girl also saw a brave man who could always help. In the end, he decided to calmly pat her on the head, and also informed her that soon they had to meet with their families and discuss their future lives. After several days, a woman met Yunhwan and greeted him politely, because I understood that there would be a conversation with him today. She continued to confidently walk down the corridor, but her thoughts were filled only with her supervisor because she could not get him out of her head. A second later, one of her partners approached her and informed her that she was dressed very nicely today, and also asked if she had any reason for it. Left alone with his thoughts, she noticed that now men were paying more attention to her, and at times she didn't like it very much because she was not used to such attention. As it turned out, only later did she realize that she dressed so nicely only because she had to have a special meeting with her husband and his family today. At the end of the working day, they drove together to this dinner, and also realized that they were probably the last ones, because everyone was already at dinner. At first, they started apologizing profusely for being late, but the man just laughed at that, because he thought that there was nothing strange here. He also noted that as it turned out, the couple came 15 minutes earlier and they did not have to apologize to them, because they fully complied with the time frame. After a second, the girl noticed a girl she didn't know in front of her, and then the woman said hello and said that she was Yunhwan's mother. After that, Yemen got a little confused. She in turn understood that it was probably not his real mother, because according to the husband's stories, his real mother had died a long, long time ago. The young man's mother was delighted that he finally introduced them to his girlfriend, and the conversation gained momentum, and people became more comfortable communicating with each other. The man decided to raise one rather important question at the table, and he asked the young man if he had looked at the dates that he'd sent to him in the mail in order to understand when such an event could be celebrated. Other people sitting at the table showed their initiative and reported that they were completely not against, and agreed with the head of the family, and especially the girl sitting next to him. The man tried to speak civilly with everyone and wanted to make a good impression on his girlfriend's parents because he thought it was quite important. Listening to all these conversations, in a moment she heard how they began to discuss her and her sister, and emphasized that she was always better than her. Now the man realized that, judging by the logic of having two girls, he was really lucky to have such a beautiful woman that he had and whom he wanted to marry. After a second, they started talking harshly and asking questions again, and then the man remarked that he had already asked his parents not to ask such questions. Surprised by what she heard, the mother could not simply say a word because she completely forgot about their conversation and now felt very uncomfortable in such a situation, and the other party was simply watching it. Also, she was very interested to know where the sister of the bride was, because usually people noticed that she always went with them, but this time for some reason, she was not there. The man with a big smile on his face announced that today their daughter was a little sick, and therefore could not come to this dinner because she was not feeling well. Later, some of them made assumptions that the sisters simply did not get along with each other, and that is why they did not want to take her with them. But the husband immediately decided to inform that this was not the case, although Yemen knew the truth. The young man's father immediately suspected something, and therefore decided to ask them something, but he did not hear a clear answer to his question. I just saw the big smile of my relatives. The woman who saw it with her own eyes was simply confused, because she did not know how to react normally, and then she realized that it was necessary to remain silent. The woman sitting across from him turned out to be Yemen's mother, so he believed that she did not pay enough attention to their sister, and because of this, they had such a conflict and they did not get along normally. After a second, he decided to change the subject, because his nose smelled a very unpleasant smell that did not suit him very much. Therefore, he decided that it was necessary to change it somehow. He calmly told the employee to calmly and politely escort their new guests to the exit, because the man no longer wanted to see them in his house. When the door closed, the girl began to feel very uncomfortable, because now she was left alone with people she did not know very well, and because of this, she was a little nervous. The first thing the man said was that he saw that the girl had encountered many difficulties on her way, but he wanted to help her as soon as possible. The first thing he asked was whether she liked everything and whether she liked the food that was on this table. Then the lady immediately confirmed the husband's assumption and emphasized that everything was delicious. Noticing her husband's movements, she thought that she was already tired of her stay in their house. Because of this, she decided that it was necessary to go home as soon as possible. At times, the man really behaved very strangely because he sometimes did not control his emotions and showed too much to little-known people. But as it turned out, he did not want the girl to leave their apartment because he thought that now she was part of their family and had to perceive them as family. Hearing such pleasant words in her direction, she was incredibly happy because she realized that she now had many close people who could really help her in any situation. But her future fiancé did not look so cheerful. Because his eyes were cast downwards, Yemen assumed that something had happened to Yunhwan. When they still got into the car and decided to go home, the girl thought about how her fiancé's father would treat her with the situation that was happening in the family. Hearing such thoughts, the man calmly reacted to it and noted that he himself did not have the most pleasant situation that happened to him in his life, so he thought that there was nothing like that in this. As it turned out, the boy decided to tell that when he was only 12 years old, his father committed suicide. Therefore, he perfectly understood what it was like to have a difficult childhood. He also emphasized that his father fully understood the situation that happened to the girl, so he could always help her no matter what. Turning his gaze to her, he emphasized that now she was a part of their family, and her problems were automatically her husband's problems, which he quickly copes with. She, in turn, did not know how to react to this because the man was getting closer every second and she was not used to such great support from him. When she got out of the car, he suggested that the girl should stay at his house for the next weekend. Then the girl asked if the move had to take place before they got married. The man did not give a clear answer to this question, but in response he asked his own question, namely, he became interested in whether the woman wanted to have children from him in the future. As it turned out, the couple did not want children at all, and the husband liked it because their opinions converged again, and this always improved their relationship. When her husband left, she decided to open her door and quietly go into her apartment and rest after such an interesting meeting with his parents. The girl did not even have time to return when suddenly someone grabbed her arm. When she returned, she noticed that it was her ex who really wanted to talk to her. He was very confused as he had already found out that she was getting married to Yunhwan. The former did not believe that she was ready to marry such a terrible man and even wanted to tell everything he knew about him. Grabbing her by the shoulders, He began to shake her and shout that her fiancé met dozens of girls and then dumped them all and lost interest in them. But she didn't want to hear that at all and believed that her boyfriend was still better than Kim and to cancel the engagement and preparations for the wedding by running to the bride's sister. Yamin emphasized that she knew everything about her fiancé well, even better than anyone else, but she was not so stupid as to blindly trust him. Now he wanted her to know that exactly 4 people were found drugged in Yunhwan's house, and one was even a girl with a stab wound. The girl tried to push him away and make it clear that she was able to deal with all the problems herself, and also did not want all kinds of nonsense to be told about her future husband. He was very angry and shouted at the whole room. It seemed to him that she wanted to take revenge on him, but now she had to take care of herself. At that moment, she thought that revenge was really her first priority, but no matter how much she wanted to put an adequate future life on the line, she would not have chosen her boss. Yemen was not so attached to this ex of hers that she was so blinded by the desire for revenge. Kim was sure that if his ex married her boss, she would definitely be unhappy all her life, since he would not be able to love her anyway. As soon as she entered her apartment, she immediately began to cry and remember everything that had happened, but Yemen really knew that her fiancé could always let her make her own choice. She immediately decided to call him and ask him personally about what Kim told her. Not even a couple of minutes passed after her call, as the groom immediately rushed to her. The girl immediately got down to business and wanted to know directly what had happened to him in America. She could not judge him only by what she heard from her former betrayer. He tried to emphasize that whatever rumors she had heard about him, they were all true. But most of all, she wanted to hear what happened to the girl with the stab wound. Yunhwan revealed that the girl had actually survived, but he hung his head from the shame he had to feel. Everything happened like that. A bunch of girls, loud parties. It all happened in his house, but Yunhwan himself was not among them. Most of all, the young man did not want to remember and tell all that, but now the girl knew for sure that he was not as he was described. At that moment, for some reason, she decided that she would definitely not be able to make a good wife, but even that surprised her husband. The young man tried to calm her down and assured her that she was definitely not in the right, and that everything related to the use of prohibited items. He was not even going to look in their direction and did not advise her to do so. Everything seems to have been resolved between them. The future husband was satisfied that his girlfriend had calmed down a little, and now it was possible to go home. As soon as she was left alone, she scrolled through everything in her head and understood that everything and the situation that happened in his house also brought him painful memories. A few days later, Yoon came to collect his bride and all her belongings. Since she was dragging it out for a long time, he decided to take the initiative and come for her. She was a bit confused and also worried about his condition, as he had just returned from a business trip and needed to rest. Their eyes immediately met, and then he gently took her hand and informed her that there are more important priorities in life, namely that she should move in with him as soon as possible. As soon as she moved to the huge and beautiful house of her future husband, she decided to find out if she could have a look around there. The man immediately put all the boxes and wanted to offer coffee. Yemen was very pleased that he was so attentive and even knew all her tastes. At first glance, it seemed to her that it was necessary to start inspecting the inn. She had a lot of things, and all the rooms were really huge. After examining everything, she entered the last beautiful room and immediately decided that this was the bedroom of her boss. She drank her freshly brewed coffee and still couldn't believe that she would be living in such a huge and beautiful house and with her beloved manager. Suddenly, she had to close her eyes because her fiancé came out of the shower and was completely undressed, which made her shy. It was actually his room, so he felt completely at ease and walked around as he pleased. Since Yemen didn't like it, he put on a robe and decided to sit next to her. At that moment, for some reason, he decided that the girl was trying to seduce him. As soon as she lay down on the bed, she was frightened and did not know what to do next. It seemed to him that she was afraid of something, but he did not understand why she was not in her room. Later, the girl barely realized that the big room itself was left just for her. But when she heard from her fiancé that he treated her exactly like a guest, it upset her a little, and she even decided that she had made a mistake by moving in with him. Yunhwan tried to do everything to make the girl relax. He began to gently kiss her hands, but in her head there were only thoughts that he considered her a guest. When she slept sweetly, he kept his eyes on her. In fact, he really liked her and was ready to do anything for her to make her feel safe. He covered her with a blanket and left her in his room because he believed that there was absolutely no need to go to her bedroom. But very soon she woke up and realized that he was around all the time, but she was worried whether she could actually be in the manager's room. The assistant was a little confused. He understood that he had a lot to discuss about the wedding, but he couldn't contact her. A few days ago, the assistant came to the head of the group and tried to provide all the information he requested earlier. Once he looked at the papers, he was now absolutely sure that he trusted Mr. and Mrs. Chi quite a lot. Now it was known that Yemen's father left her mother and did not care for his daughter at all. And that is why Yemen's father was denied a visit to the chairman. From that moment on, he would never be able to be alone with him again. He immediately informed his wife about what happened to the head. They really did not understand why they could be treated like that. The woman tried to reassure him that the chairman must have thought something like this up on his own, so it was necessary to simply solve all their questions among themselves. But he did not think at all that there were misunderstandings between them. It was definitely something much more important, since he was not allowed to see him at all and was expelled. Therefore, he knew for sure that it was all because of his wife. How would a woman keep her mouth shut at a meeting and spread the word about Nara's daughter's wedding? But she began to blame Yemen, as she believed that it was she who behaved rather strangely, and the head was very offensive when he heard the truth about his new daughter-in-law. He was well aware that his status in the company was becoming more and more unstable every day, but he still hoped that because of his long tongue, his women should not be kicked out of the company. The man was 100% sure that it was because of this woman that everything happened. If he would show himself somehow, he would definitely be able to save his skin. The next day, when the girl woke up in a new house in a luxurious bedroom, she kept thinking that it was all just like a magical dream. She could not find her manager anywhere, so she decided that she would definitely have to eat breakfast alone, but there were no products in any of the bedside tables. Everything looked like a model house, but at that moment, her loneliness dissipated and Yunhwan appeared immediately. He said that he had already tried to wake her up, but she definitely did not want to wake up earlier. She was very surprised since she did not feel that they were trying to wake her up, but that was not important. She wanted to know if there were any products in the house that could be used to cook something. Pretty soon, it turned out that there were all the necessary products for the pasta, and therefore the girl decided to do everything herself. But when she noticed that everything was at the very top, she knew for sure that she couldn't get there without help. Without even thinking, Yunhwan immediately picked her up with his powerful hands and began to lift her up. He understood that she would not be able to cope without his help. At that moment, she remembered their childhood and realized that he did this all the time, although it was possible to simply put a chair. He always carried her in his arms as a child and helped her see all the things she couldn't reach. And when she found some fruit from a tree in her hands, she always tried to share it with him. She even tried to imagine his expression, which must have been very funny. Her thoughts were immediately interrupted by Yunhwan, as he was also wondering what happy moments she remembered that brought a smile to her face. Yemen still dared and invited him to have breakfast together. Of course, it was pleasant for him, and he even stopped considering her greedy, although it was just a joke on his part. While they were still talking, the girl took the macaroni in her hands and tried to cook something. It was actually something new for him, as it was the first time that someone had started cooking for him, and he would be eating with someone. Still, she couldn't resist asking how many girls he had before her, and most importantly, how many he dated. He tried to answer all her questions honestly, so he did not consider any of the girls with whom he was close seriously enough. It seemed to her that he lived in some other world. Now it even seemed to her that all that she remembered from their childhood was really not important. Although it might seem rather selfish, Yemen still decided to intervene in asking how many female partners he had. When she proposed to him, from the very beginning the conditions were quite free, so she understood that she had no right to be upset because of the numbers of girls who were before her. It seemed to him that she was a little saddened by what she heard, but it must have been quite late, since they had already begun to live together and could be considered husband and wife. Yemen tried to apologize for all the questions she asked, but she understood that it was not necessary to have high hopes for marriage in order not to be disappointed later. In fact, he didn't understand why she needed to know about all his exes, since none of them really mattered to him, and it was all his past. The heroine understood that from the very beginning she made a decision not to bind him in relationships with other girls, so he was quite a free person. It was at that moment that he announced that from the moment he decided to marry Yemen, he had no relationship with any girl. She was just shocked, but decided that it was he who was trying to calm her down, because he felt guilty that he had been busy the last few days and had no time for her. Therefore, she decided to confess that she had never had any relationship with any man. It even seemed very strange to him. The next day at work, everything was as usual. All workers solved organizational issues. As soon as she got her hands on a folder with documents related to the activities of the sales department of that quarter, she did not understand why she had to throw it away. While she was still thinking about work, she ran into her manager again, who decided that it was again on purpose. At the same moment, he immediately noticed that the engagement ring they bought together was not on her finger. Yemen tried to explain that when she was at work, she took off his gift since none of the employees knew that she was engaged to the manager. But few people were interested in his opinion. He immediately raised his hand and showed that his ring was always with him. The young man did not want to let her go at all and said that he had some business that needed to be discussed with her. Although she was a little busy, she tried not to refuse him. They were both happy to spend time together. But the man immediately warned that a trip and a meeting awaited him, and since the managing director himself was looking for the girl, the young man himself decided to bring her to him. For a moment, she was upset that he had to go, but there had to be a reason he called her, so she really wanted to know. While they were going down the stairs, she even offered to bring him the keys to the company car, but she heard that he would only drive his own. He wanted to confess something else to her, but he did not know how she would react to it. As soon as she looked at him, she already understood that it had to be something quite serious. The manager remarked that he saw how the group leader was courting her, so he decided that they had a fairly trusting and friendly relationship between them. He continued to hug her and intently tried to look into her eyes. Every time she remembered him, she felt warmth and care. Yemen firmly knew that no one had heard her conversation with the groom. She wanted no one to know about the relationship with the manager, so she insisted that their relationship was purely business. The young man insisted that everyone knew their boss was cool, handsome, pumped, and had plenty of money, but he tried to warn her to be careful. As soon as he heard that Yemen broke up with her boyfriend, it immediately became apparent to everyone that she had become close to the manager. Now she constantly thought that after all, more than one person from work had already guessed about their relationship, and the manager was generally clever. Since there was nothing else to talk about, the colleague immediately offered to have lunch together, but she politely refused because she wanted to finish her work. He wanted her to understand that he would not be looking for a relationship in the middle of the company, and therefore insisted that she pay attention to the fact that their manager was not the person he pretended to be. Yemen tried to finish that silly conversation as soon as possible, and reminded the manager that he was already expected at the meeting, and she needed to return to her workplace. While the girl was making coffee, she kept thinking about the manager, with whom she really wanted a close relationship and even expected an offer. She still could not understand why everyone paid attention to Yemen in the first place, and considered her quite cunning, high-minded, and thought that she was pretending to be unknown to whom. Girls who behaved quite politely always hid something in their nature, and it depressed her a lot. When the director offered to have dinner together, the young man immediately refused, as the roads were already crowded at that time. But since the manager could not drink at all, no one wanted to go anywhere with him. The last time Yemen saw him drunk, he didn't even want to let anyone home. Yemen was now absolutely sure that her manager could be considered an angel, since he definitely did not have such drinking habits, and got on quite well with all his colleagues. At one point, Yemen even suspected that he was seeing another girl, but in fact he was just going to the pool or the gym. And in general, she understood that her fiancé was really busy. He and his colleague still decided to go to the restaurant, which was quite far, but it did not bother anyone. As soon as they entered the new restaurant, at first glance it seemed very expensive, so the girl immediately decided that he definitely did not need to treat her. But for him, that particular day was quite special, the joy of which even he lived, so it was possible not to pay attention to the prices in that restaurant. While they were choosing food, Yemen really wanted to know why the manager wanted to treat her so much, but it was important for him to surprise her with something. Since she understood that he really began to show special signs of attention to her, she decided to emphasize that she had a friend, so the colleague did not need to waste time and start courting her. But he explained that he heard quite recently that she had just broken up with her fiancé, so he did exactly that. Yemen immediately wanted to put all the dots, and therefore informed that she did not like him, and all this could not be continued any further. But it was important for him not to spread any rumors, and he thought that the point was precisely that she did not want to start a relationship with a colleague at work. The young man was very persistent. There was only one thought in her head, that very soon she would marry her boss, and it was definitely impossible to have any relations on the side, even friendly ones in the middle of their company. It was very strange that he himself did not react at all to all her words and stood only on his own. The girl was sure that the young man was one of those who did not understand refusals at all. The heroine emphasized that it was necessary to pretend that their conversation did not happen at all, and also did not want to continue meeting with him at all, so she suggested that they simply go home. It was very important to her that he understood that she had her boyfriend, so she thought it was right to settle for herself. After the restaurant, he really wanted to take her home, even though Yemen asked him not to do it. Also, she really didn't want him to see the house she had recently moved to. There was a moment when it seemed necessary to call the groom and inform him that he was spending the night at his old apartment. She might not be home for just one day, so she didn't know if she should warn her boyfriend about it, since they were more like neighbors than true lovers. But as soon as she heard his voice on the phone, she immediately felt that he was a little angry. The girl reported that her dinner with the manager took too long, so she wanted to spend the night in her apartment. After the conversation, she even felt a little sad that Yunhwan didn't even ask why she wouldn't return home after all. She was only happy that she hadn't taken all the things out of her house yet. But what happened was exactly what she did not expect. A couple of minutes later, after opening the door of her apartment, she saw her future husband right in front of her eyes. After walking around her apartment, he made sure that she was actually alone, and this calmed him down, because when he was driving, he was already fantasizing about everything. The man emphasized that they now lived together, and she definitely shouldn't have spent the night alone in an empty apartment. In fact, she was very interested to hear why he left all his affairs and came to her, but deep down she liked it that he still cared about her. Afterwards, she offered him some tea as there was nothing else in the kitchen. She didn't take her eyes off him even for a moment, and that made him a little wary. Then the lady still decided to admit that she really liked him being around her, and also his serious expression when he was deciding some matters. But at that moment his expression was quite calm, and because of that, she saw him as her future husband. Yunhwan couldn't hold back anymore. He gently held her face in his hands and began to kiss her. Very soon she could no longer push him away and began to respond to his kisses and actions. Later they ended up in the same bed and slept peacefully like a real couple. But Yemen soon woke up from the fact that he started squeezing her hard just during sleep. She decided that he had some kind of nightmare, because she heard different words during the dream. As a child, when they were playing together, he lifted her up to get an apple, but he couldn't hold it and they fell to the ground together. At that moment she began to scream, as she understood that her friend had lost consciousness, and also decided that it was necessary to call someone for help, because his pain did not pass. When he came to, he said that he heard the sound of the siren and remembered that his mother tried to commit suicide under him. As a child, he did not understand at all why she wanted to do this, but he decided that it was precisely because she did not love him at all. Yemen now knew for sure that the trauma of his childhood was still raw and had nowhere to go, so she asked him to hug her tightly, and she would be by his side. When they both woke up, they began to talk about the days of their childhood that he had dreamed about. He even remembered quite well what she used to call him. And she began to remember how, as children, she fed him unripe persimmons, but he did not understand why she remembered the very moment that he did not want to remember. Yemen started laughing and emphasized that she definitely never liked persimmon. She had to try it once as a child, and after that she didn't even look in its direction. Yunhwan decided that this was the memory she had decided to take revenge for when he joked about how she ate peanuts almost every day. In those moments she felt warmth and affection from him, and also came to the conclusion that he was actually very kind and gentle. It was when the girl was near him that she could smile calmly. Each of his touches to her made her incredibly happy, and therefore for a moment she imagined that only the best was waiting for them. The next day he made breakfast for her, and now he was interested to hear about her dinner with the manager, where he treated her to a steak that was eaten on dates. Yemen immediately emphasized that she had warned the young man that she would definitely pay for herself, so she had to take some money from her credit card. The price was a bit high for a casual after-work lunch. As soon as he listened to everything calmly, he immediately decided that the manager must have confessed his feelings to her. And then he even added that the fact that the two of them started spending time together recently started to annoy him a little. Still, She understood that he really didn't care about her colleagues or where she spent her time and with whom. Yemen understood that all this was not pleasant for him, but she immediately tried to assure him that she refused him, so there was absolutely no reason to worry. No Yunhwan immediately pointed out that the manager could have given her what she deserved, emphasizing that their relationship was actually fake. Immediately tried to promise that now she would try to behave in such a way as to avoid any inconvenience to their wedding. The man was already a little angry, but he wanted her to understand that he could give her what she wanted. It was all quite offensive for her, and once again proved that she was nobody to him. The next day, the manager again began to pay attention to her and again invited her to lunch, but this time Yemen immediately refused. But he constantly pursued her and did not leave her for a moment. He even wondered why she was in such a good mood that day. Yemen understood that everyone was watching them, especially a colleague who was delighted with the manager. But it was scary for Yemen to think that the young man actually thought that their relationship could go one step higher than the working one. Now the colleague was very angry and was sure that Yemen was cunning and definitely planned to seduce the manager. Therefore, she decided that the game could be started and she could get the main prize. The company's employees were very surprised when they noticed in the dining room that the manager himself had come there to have lunch. Decide that he is tired of expensive food and wants to try something simple. The manager immediately noticed that the manager always had lunch at his place, and now he was among all his ordinary colleagues. It was now that Yemen's colleague had a great opportunity to get to know her, as well as learn about her relationship with the manager. Everything became immediately clear to her when she heard that the girl was asking about their colleague, so she did not hide the fact that he treated her to a steak that she had paid for herself. But since she and he needed to deliver papers to another office, they had to have lunch together. Yemen also immediately offered her to join him next time. In fact, she thought that Yemen behaved quite decently, and that was what annoyed her. She wanted to draw his attention to her so much that even now she could no longer control her emotions. Now she went around and told everyone how mean Yemen was, that she started bragging about how much the steak she ate with the manager cost, and also added that he didn't give her a report. All the girls knew very well that their friend had her eye on him, and now she was angry that someone could have dinner with him except her. It was believed that now she needed to be careful with Yemen. It seemed to them that Yemen was trying to seduce the manager, and it all started happening just when her fiancé left her. Therefore, for them, Yemen looked cute on the outside, but inside she was a witch. A colleague believed that Yemen always behaved very distantly in her presence, but tried to fully reveal herself in front of men. The lady even noticed her laughing at their leader. Now she definitely could not close her eyes to all those antics, and wanted to strike her with revenge very soon, but she did not know that everything was definitely not as she imagined. During the work, Yemen felt that their relationship had changed a little and the colleague was quite hostile towards her. The heroine immediately began to remember how her colleague showed all the signs of attention to Mr. O, and now everything became clear that she definitely had her eye on him. Now, at every opportunity, she tried to leave them, and once again definitely not to anger her colleague. She thought that it was all just her imagination, but now she was convinced that she was right and did not understand why Yemen was behaving like that. The heroine finally guessed that the colleague was definitely in love with O, and all her disdain for Yemen was precisely because of this. Communication with the manager was definitely not beneficial to her, so she decided to stay away from him as much as possible from that moment on. Very soon, she met her fiancé, who was waiting for her to return from work. She immediately noticed that he still continued to wear their wedding ring. Before the girl wanted to answer something, he emphasized that she could also start wearing her gift from the next day, and was ready to tell everyone about their relationship. But since their wedding rings were the same, no one needed to say anything. Yun was sure that everyone could guess anyway, and he also emphasized that their wedding should be grandiose and cannot be compared to any other. But she was very afraid that their relationship could end very quickly precisely because she could simply get bored of him. Then she would become just a laughing stock who showed off her engagement ring, and the wedding would fail. But he didn't understand what made her think that way. Yunhwan thought that Yemen was just perfect for him even more than anyone else. She was well aware that she suited the role of a fake woman better than anyone, but wanted to say that their conversations and postures during sleep were also perfect, but not in a fake way. At that moment, a colleague of his girlfriend approached the manager, and for some reason offered coffee, wanting him to pay attention to her. It was at that moment that she noticed the ring on his hand. The woman could not even think that all the time their manager had a girlfriend whom he wanted to marry, and after that all his colleagues insisted that he show her to everyone. The man decided to do it just once, so everyone ran and began to look at the ring with their mouths open. The next time, Yemen still wore her gift, but she felt very insecure and did not understand what the reaction of her colleagues would be. She tried to laugh and hide her hands behind her back every time someone addressed her, but it all looked rather strange to everyone. As soon as she paid attention to the report, she understood that her name was not there at all and everything was the same last time, but then she did not pay attention to it. But as soon as it happened again, she knew it was on purpose. Before, she was really okay with it, but now it just started to annoy her, as it was an interference in the sphere of her own interests. This area was their work, and so there was definitely no need to interfere with personal relationships, so it was definitely not going to sit idly by. The girls still couldn't calm down to wash all Yemen's bones. One of them even decided that she was wagging her tail in front of many to be treated to a drink. At that moment, Yemen interrupted their conversation. It looked pretty rude of her, but she couldn't do anything else now, so she definitely didn't deserve to be treated like that. The girl had only a ring in her head that she saw on the hand of another employee, and she wanted to know who gave her such a beautiful ring. After a few minutes, she was told that the break was already over and that she should not think of resting too much, but her partner did not like it very much. Yemen in turn looked at them with her head held high, because she perfectly understood that those girls constantly discussed her and at times were very jealous of her, because they did not have such a husband. She decided to talk to them rather rudely, and the group of young girls did not at all realize why they were treated so badly, although some of them understood but did not want to admit it. She decided to explain it by the fact that when they all gathered together with the manager, she ordered a delicious steak, but no one even shared it with her, even though she paid for everything. And the girl standing in the middle continued to feel confident, but the girls who were behind her began to turn their heads in different directions, because it would be convenient for them to hear it. After some time, they emphasized that the girl was telling all this so that they would stop discussing everyone behind their backs, and they said everything to the face. They also heard that if she saw it again, she would make some decisions, but this time they just calmly decided to let them go, and one of the girls thought hard about it. Approaching the leader, they decided to bow to her and apologize for their bad deeds, but one of them still decided not to apologize, when she was left alone. Then Yemen decided to ask why the girl didn't write her name on the list in her report, and then she seemed speechless. Then the employee bowed to her again and decided to apologize to her, and she in turn emphasized that there was nothing terrible, but asked her to be a little more attentive. When her worker stepped aside a little, then she could not believe why she reprimanded her so much, and the girl also realized that she would not let anyone else do this. After a few seconds, the woman decided to rest a little, because she realized that with such emotions she could say something unnecessary to someone, and it scared her a lot. Walking up the stairs in her head, she wanted to come up with a special plan with the help of which she could throw all her friends out of her head, as well as get Yemen kicked out of the company. She realized that she needed to get very close to the head of the company, because it was because of this that she could get her rival kicked out of the company. Having done a good makeup, she decided to take the documents and go to the manager and discuss with him several important things about the company. She politely knocked on the door and asked if he was busy, but then the worker emphasized that he had important meetings and also decided to ask what happened. The girl, in her turn, decided to go in anyway and talk to the boss in order to talk with him about some important details in their documents that she had in her hands. After reading all those documents, he immediately drew his conclusion and recommended the girl to adjust some factors that could affect their results in the future. Hearing such pleasant words in her direction, she immediately decided to thank him for his help, because she saw how it could positively affect their success. After discussing all the details and their events at the end, the man wanted to know if she was in a good position in their company, and then the girl immediately confirmed his assumption. Then he said the following words, namely, he did not think that in his company people who occupy such positions would bother him with such small, unnecessary things. Lowering her eyes downwards, she quickly began to apologize and simply did not understand what was happening, because she thought that she was doing everything right, but it turned out to be a little different. At the end, he still asked them to go about their business as soon as possible, and then the girl was a little happy, because she began to think that things could be better for them in the future. Sitting down at her workplace, the employee could not understand why the manager did not see that she wanted to flirt with him a little, and all the next day only this thought sat in her head. In the end, the girl quickly opened the door and offered her husband dinner and thus wanted to apologize for her bad deed. She was sincerely sorry that she had done such a bad thing, because only later did she realize that she should not have distracted the head of the company over such trifles. Folding his hands as usual, he thought that there was something wrong with this, because usually the girl never behaved like that. Therefore, he did not know what to answer her at that moment. At the end, he said that there would be no more such mistakes. But at dinner, he did not say a word at all because he was busy with his affairs, which did not give him peace that day. The angry girl quickly went to the elevator and wanted to get home as soon as possible because she had never been humiliated as much as the manager did that day. After work, without thinking for a long time, he decided to go to his beloved bride, and as soon as he arrived home, he saw that she was already sleeping soundly. After hearing his voice, she quickly opened her eyes and saw her husband in front of her, and then asked how his day was and what happened to him. He, in turn, looked at her eyes for a long time and could not believe that he was lucky enough to marry such a beautiful girl. When she woke up a little, she wanted to know if her husband had just come to see her, but as it turned out, he was at work all day and only left in the evening. At that moment, the manager asked her if she had any problems, but at that moment she just started to smile and emphasize that everything was fine with her. In her thoughts, they understood who was very unpleasant to her, but she did not want to tell this to the manager, because she thought that she could stand up for herself. At the end, he wished her sweet dreams and asked the girl to rest so that she would be ready for the important day tomorrow, and she, in turn, noticed a woman's perfume on him. At the moment, this understanding made her a little uncomfortable because she understood that there were many beautiful girls in the company that her husband might like, but she tried to drive away such thoughts. The next day at work, the manager wanted to talk to her, but the girl said that they could see him later, but the man still told her to stop. Then he noted that they could go together in his car because he wanted to ask the girl something, but the beauty did not expect to hear such a thing in her direction. The manager, in turn, noticed that his wife was somehow behaving strangely, but as it turned out later, she did all this so that there would be no rumors in the company. She, in turn, continued to emphasize that she liked everything completely, and they did not want her husband to constantly help her because she was confident in her abilities. Then the man decided to talk to her about the wedding, and also said that his grandfather liked the girl very much, and if he canceled the wedding, he would simply kill him. After such words, she became much calmer, because she was once again convinced that she was marrying a strong and determined man who could always help her in difficult situations. On their way, they met one worker who immediately started talking to the girl forever, and also greeted the head of their company. The girl was pleased that now there were no rumors about her, and also that everyone took her seriously, but at the same time had some respect and did not talk about her behind her back. Then the worker made an assumption that Yemen had her own car, but at the moment, the manager noticed that she had just arrived with him earlier and was in the parking lot. She was very surprised by what she heard, but at the same time she could not say anything. But when the newlyweds entered the elevator, she asked if they, too, did not want to go with them. When she was in the elevator, the man still decided to press her against the wall and show everyone that he wanted to kiss her, and then the worker simply could not believe her eyes. And when he saw her, she almost fell to her knees. Therefore, she decided to apologize to the other employees and also wanted to quickly get out of the elevator. After they all left the elevator, the girl decided to approach one of the workers and ask if everything was okay with her, but she didn't even know what to say at that moment. After looking at why the woman behaved like that, she concluded that she drank a lot yesterday, so she offered him special pills for her, but her friend refused them. The woman continued to look at the head of the company for a long time and realized that if he was going to meet Yemen together, then now it was necessary to travel and communicate with her more. As soon as they entered a place where they could have a normal snack, then the employee immediately wished the newlyweds bon appétit, and he, in turn, thanked his husband very much. After some time, an acquaintance of hers approached the worker and invited her to go to lunch together, because I didn't want to go there alone because it was rather uninteresting. But that day, she couldn't focus on work at all, because all her thoughts were only about Yemen and manager Yunhwan, and after a second, she remembered that she saw a wedding ring on the girl's hand. When she came to lunch, she took the initiative to ask an acquaintance if the girl had seen the employee's new boyfriend, because she had a wedding ring on her hand. The employee who was sitting next to them made an assumption that people could wear any jewelry just like that. Therefore, he did not attach any importance to it at all. And he also thought that if you don't wear any jewelry on your hands, then boys will always court you. And then my friend really thought about such an idea. Then another girl joined their conversation and also agreed with the boys, and had the opinion that the engagement ring had no meaning at all for Yemen. When no one from the company understood her at all, she made an assumption that Yemen's and the manager's wedding rings were very similar, and because of this, they could meet together. The worker was incredibly surprised by what he heard and then wanted to know who else from those present had seen the ring on Yunhwan's hand. After a few minutes, they began to argue very strongly because their opinions were completely different, and they could not come to any common decision. Because of this, a small conflict arose. Noticing a young couple, they immediately stopped talking about something because they understood that it was not very nice, and then the girl asked if they had already had dinner. As it turned out, she just wanted to politely treat everyone to her cookies, because I thought it was quite tasty, especially after a good dinner. Then everyone raised their hands up and announced that they wanted to taste these cookies, and later they began to thank the girl for such a wonderful, sweet snack. As it turned out, she liked to taste them for a long time, so she decided to treat her friends because she thought it was a good idea. As it turned out, everyone liked it. After a while, she began to notice that all the workers were looking only at her hand, and then the girl wanted to know if something was wrong with her. But then they all quickly turned their gaze in the other direction. And later, the girl remarked that she did not believe that their rings were similar, but it was all just her opinion, and she did not want to express it, especially in front of a friend. Only later did I realize that I didn't remember what the manager's wedding ring looked like, but I still didn't really understand how they could meet together at all. Eventually, the employees still decided to change the topic of conversation, and then the woman asked if the company manager had to come to their company's dinner tonight, and then one of them remarked that he probably wouldn't be there, because there were a lot of work-related issues. When the evening came, the girl decided to have a better conversation with her work partner, or believed that he could know much more than they did. As it turned out, after some time, the manager fired his ex-wife from the company because I didn't want to see her every day at work, and then the woman really liked this story. Unfortunately, on that day, Yemen was with them at this dinner, and at times listened to not very pleasant things in her direction, although no one had ever said such things directly to her eyes. Only after some time did the worker realize that the worker heard her every word, but did not react to them in any way at all, and then she did not like it even more. After a second, she changed her face and wanted to ask the girl who her new boyfriend was, because rumors in the company spread incredibly fast. A second later, a man was already standing next to her and decided to apologize to the employees, because he had a lot of work today, because of which he could not come. One of them politely approached him and immediately greeted him and also gave him a chair so that the man could sit quietly and talk with them about work. Everyone accepted his wishes and also wanted to order him something to eat. But the man noted that he had come not long ago and could not accept this dinner because he had to leave soon. He politely tried to answer his colleagues' questions, although he himself knew at times that rumors were spreading quickly in the company, and he did not like it very much. After some time, while sitting in this establishment, she heard that her clothes started to smell very strongly from this meat that was on their table. Because of this, the girl was a little disappointed. But after a second, the men began to look even more closely at the hands of the newlyweds to see the wedding rings there, and in a moment they felt very funny for some reason and began to laugh loudly. He was tired of hearing all these bad words in his direction. That's why he decided to get up anyway and clearly stated that he wanted to tell the whole truth to everyone. Approaching his bride closer, he told everyone clearly and loudly that they wanted to get married soon. Therefore, they planned a wedding in the near future. Hearing such words, the woman was simply shocked and did not know how to react to it. And then the man began to tell that he and Yemen had known each other since childhood. That's why they were so close. She, in turn, continued to look at the newlyweds with a strange face and did not know how to react to it because deep down she was very sorry that this beautiful manager did not meet with her. At the end, he politely said goodbye to everyone and informed them that they would already meet next week because they wanted to take a break from work together. Just in case, he left them his credit card with which they could easily pay for dinner if the limit increased some amount of the company. The girl also politely said goodbye to everyone at the end, and the men waved their hands and were to some extent very glad that such respectable people had finally left the dinner. At dinner, they were simply stunned by such news, but one of them was most surprised by the fact that they had been friends since childhood. although some employees did not believe it. Some of them wanted to know how long Yemen worked in the manager's company, but no one had such information, so they never found out the answer to this question. The workers speculated that the girl simply came from a rich family, and thus she was able to befriend Yunhwan since childhood, but this was only speculation. They devoted the whole evening to wanting to know who the girl and the man used to be, and why they decided to get married. But they could not find answers to many questions. Many people talked about Yunhwan as a beautiful man who had everything he wanted since childhood, and therefore everyone believed that he simply had rich parents who gave him all this. After some time, the man decided to return to the question of what exactly the manager was wearing, because no one was able to properly see the ring on his hand. Meanwhile, the newlyweds were already at home and calmly decided to drink wine together because they did not want to continue the evening with their employees. Having poured wine and served grapes to him in this way, the man wanted to somehow treat the girl who came to his house, but for some reason she was still not in the mood. Having tipped over a glass of wine, the girl asked if the manager was okay, because she saw the reaction of the employees, which was not very to her husband's liking. He, in turn, decided to note that it was unpleasant for him to listen to all these strange words, so he decided to tell everyone that they were a couple and the girl liked it. Also, she really liked the moment that always before making any decision, the man asked for permission and recommended himself to the girl, thus showing that she also played a big role for him. Then they started recalling all their past childhood memories to the girl. Then they remembered the most when they did math together with her husband, and he was pleased that she remembered it. The man also recalled that she cried quite a lot as a child, but the girl said that when her husband moved to America, she stopped doing it because she knew that no one would support her. He felt incredibly sorry for her, because he could not imagine what it would be like to live without the support of loved ones. Later, all her thoughts went only to the past, because she wanted to remember when she was a little girl who stood by the fence and after a second saw that someone was calling her. Turning her head, she saw a little man who begged her to be careful, because he knew that she could fall at any moment. She still listened to his advice, although she understood that he too was a child who did not quite understand what to do in emergency situations. At that time he seemed so good to her, but at the same time a little arrogant, because he never heard the girl, although all the actions he did were only for her benefit. For the first time in his life, the head of the company heard such pleasant words in his direction. He was incredibly uncomfortable, because he did not expect that she would support him so much. When they had finished their delicious wine, he suggested that she go to bed, because he could see that the girl was getting a little nervous and also incredibly tired for the day. After a moment, he noticed that she could not walk by herself because she had drunk too much, and then he decided to take her in his arms and carry her to bed by herself. After all, she did not stop with compliments, because I really wanted to support the manager, and he in turn continued to carry his bride to bed. Then he decided to inquire whether she lied to him when she said that her husband was her first love, but Yemen then confirmed what he heard. The man himself remarked that he never liked different girls who wanted to have dinner with him, but Yemen was an exception on his list because she was completely different. Seeing the excitement in her eyes, the young man immediately asked if everything was fine and if she really wanted to kiss him, because he did not want to impose himself. But when he kissed her, the girl immediately pushed him away for some reason, and then he didn't quite understand what was happening. She apologized profusely but emphasized that she was very tired and did not know how to tell her husband about it, because she simply did not understand what she was saying and wanted to sleep. Then he decided to just cover her with a veil and go about his business, because he saw that his bride was already completely asleep, so he didn't want to disturb her. Waking up in the morning, she wanted to know how much she lost yesterday, because her head was just splitting into two pieces and she didn't understand what was happening. After a second, the man asked if he could enter the room, and then she allowed him to bring her a bottle of special water, after which it should feel better. At the moment, he asked if he was a good kisser, but after hearing that, Yemen started coughing because she choked on water from such a question and did not understand what it was about. But later he said that yesterday the girl told him exactly that, and then she realized that she did not remember anything at all from their evening. After some time, the lady began to remember everything, but she understood that that evening she said a lot of different words for which she could not properly answer. The manager in turn noted that there was nothing wrong with this, because it was all in the past, and he did not take these words seriously, because he understood that the girl was under the influence of alcohol. She immediately started apologizing because she emphasized that she had nothing bad in mind against her husband, and she was also ashamed of last night. noticing that he did not listen to her at all. She decided to raise the tempo of her voice a little, so that he could still hear her and understand that she was not joking at that moment. Coming closer, he still wanted to somehow smooth the atmosphere and inquire that she had not lied to him yesterday when she said that he was a good kisser. Then she was completely speechless and did not know how to answer this question. That's why I just watched his eyes, because I thought it was very necessary. Hugging for a long time, they talked about their future lives because the manager wanted to convey as best as possible that he had very serious intentions for Yemen. Now he did not want to let her go from his hands. The man was firmly convinced that she had no one else before him, and definitely would not. The day after their wild night, he tried to feed her as usual, and first it was the meat that had to be eaten. But she considered herself old enough to be fed, but she didn't want to upset him, so she gave in to everything. That was how he could make sure that she really liked everything. Yoon even wanted to wash the dishes after breakfast, as he believed that such a small and fragile girl should not have done that. At that moment, she thought that he still treated her as if she were still 9 years old. As soon as he started touching her again, she couldn't stand it anymore and tried to push him away, but the wedding date was still set without her knowledge. The man tried to calm her down, as she could definitely not worry about all the preparation. All that was needed was to exchange the dress next week. In fact, she was very surprised, but the schedule was quite tight, so it would definitely be difficult to change the date, since it was assigned according to the manager's schedule. A little later, she admitted that she simply could not believe that everything would happen so soon and was very grateful to him. The groom even thought that his girlfriend's dream would come true and she would marry her first love. He also really didn't like the fact that she called him completely different from what he wanted and tried to correct it anyway. When she looked at him, she didn't even know what to answer, and therefore promised that she would address him simply by his name. After a few days, everyone was very surprised and could not believe what they heard. After all, she decided to confess, and therefore announced that she would get married in a month, and now it was time to treat everyone and hand out invitations. But in fact, they had not yet arrived. Now all the colleagues began to ask whether she was really ready to become the wife of their manager, and how they should now address her. Colleagues immediately began to congratulate Yemen, and were also going to come to her wedding. But now it was time for everyone to return to their duties. As soon as she told everything, she immediately felt relief and hoped that now there was definitely nothing to worry about so much. The only problem was that she needed to finish all her projects before the wedding. When she was done with her work duties, she immediately headed to her fiancé to go home. But since the young man had been working until very late lately, she did not even understand how he coped with all the affairs, so she had to go home alone. When she calmly walked down the street, she immediately suspected that a rather strange car was driving behind her. But as soon as she stopped, she immediately saw her acquaintance there. The girl tried with all her might to run away from him, but he persistently wanted to talk to her. She well understood that there definitely could not be any conversation between them, but the man grabbed her hand and did not want to let go. Since the girl did not answer his calls and messages, he decided to follow her because she was not at the old apartment. In the middle of the street, he kept trying to shout loudly and could not calm down. Therefore, she still gave him the opportunity to speak out and not waste any more time on him. Her eyes began to widen as she heard him begin to speak to her. But at that very moment, Yamin immediately announced that the ceremony was for Yoon because he was her first love, and she loved him more than anyone. He didn't really know what he needed to do at that moment or what to say, so he just started threatening her. She really didn't care, so she didn't wait a minute and decided to just go home. Yemen knew that the head of the company was aware of everything, so there was definitely nothing to worry about. The young man tried to confess everything now and even got down on his knees. He wanted to tell that now he really knew everything about Yemen's sister and wanted to get a chance for forgiveness. He decided to tell the girl that Yunhwan definitely couldn't love someone like her, and that in reality, no one was capable of loving her. He wanted one more chance to make things right in their relationship. All this was definitely not important to her. As much as he wanted to fix everything, he wouldn't have been able to cause her so many problems, knowing that she already had a fiancé. Wasting no more time on him, she turned and left him alone on his knees in the middle of the street. The manager was very tired, but his work was by no means finished, but it was necessary to deal with everything before the wedding. He usually stayed in the office until late at night, and he really disliked the darkness in all hotels, so he really didn't want to go home. The man even remembered his mother passing out after getting drunk, and then all the sounds of the ambulance siren. But now everything was completely different in his life. As soon as he crossed the threshold of their house, the girl rushed to him with all her might. She tried to show that she missed him very much. When he held her in his hands, he thought at that very moment that he could never even imagine that one day it would be like this, that he would be expected at home. In fact, he was satisfied with everything. Yun began to kiss his bride tenderly, and the thought that they would soon become a family made him very happy. She just couldn't believe what she was hearing. There wasn't much time left, and they had to go on a trip soon. When young people met in a cafe, the young man still did not pay any attention to her and thought only about himself. His thoughts were only about Yoon, who he actually lost to, and spending time with his bride wasn't that interesting anymore. He decided that he would definitely be able to show everyone that he had made the right decision, even if his finish would be the worst. When the mother saw Nari, she was simply stunned by how her daughter looked, and everything had to be perfect before the wedding itself. The girl was just annoyed and kept thinking that her sister was much more beautiful, so her fiancé's thoughts were about her. Her parents couldn't believe what was happening to her, but she needed to be calmed somehow because she started to destroy everything around her. The woman tried to explain that her daughter was just worried, which is why she had a nervous breakdown. It was necessary for everyone to understand that raising children was not easy at all. But he still did not hold back. He wanted his daughter to come to terms and accept the fact that Yoon would marry someone else. Now her emotions were simply overwhelming her, and she still admitted that she had loved Yunhwan for quite a long time, but she wanted to marry someone else just to avenge him for leaving her. At that moment, even the father began to accuse his wife that it was she who was to blame for bringing up Nari like that. Now he could not even bear that the relationship in their family began to deteriorate again. He warned that Nari was going to marry Kim anyway, so there was no need to make any more trouble. When Yemen was alone, a young man approached her, who introduced himself as a friend of her fiancé. The girl was very surprised when she heard his name. That's what Yunhwan called himself as a child. In fact, she did not understand anything. He began to behave rather strangely, but he already knew about their wedding. Afterwards, he handed her some paper and confessed that Yoon had been eyeing him. She found out that Yoon didn't want to see his friend anymore, so she also refused to help organize their meeting. She decided to set boundaries for herself. That's why she was very worried not to spoil anything by interfering in something she didn't know. When the woman saw the state in which he arrived, she was even frightened, but she was even ready to prepare something for him. She recalled that even when she got married at a young age, she still could not rely on her family and could not even expect love in their marriage. But very soon everything got better for them when a child was born, but their happiness did not last long. Very soon, as the girl grew up, a tragedy happened and her mother passed away. She stayed with her father. 6 months later, she met a boy with whom she would be friends in the future. The man warned his wife that this boy was supposed to officially become her son, even though he was not her biological child. She tried to do everything that was asked of her, and even tried to become for the boy the one he could rely on. When he grew up, he immediately began to bring his mother gifts and thought that they were beautiful. Very soon, he became a pretty good employee, solved many different issues in which he was just a professional. He understood that their company had enough different funds, and therefore he definitely could not worry. But if something could go wrong, he was ready to take all the responsibility. The man was satisfied and believed that his grandson should have such confidence. Yunhwan was confident enough. Tverdo knew that the man had to be exactly where he was expected. He had to remember his friend, whom in childhood he also considered his family, but from that moment, he decided not to trust anyone else. But when I met her, I realized that it was time to change my views and trust the best woman. When they were talking, she decided to immediately report that a friend had been looking for him that day, but could not reach him. It was immediately clear that it was Yuna's friend who was connected with the situation that took place in the house, and she wanted to know everything. At that moment, he simply could not believe his ears that she, knowing what he was like, still believed him. This was very important for him. It seemed to him that they lived in such a world where even relatives could betray each other, but the girl did not know what it was all about. But he was very interested in what she could do. How would she find out that once upon a time, he used a lot of alcohol and drugs? But she never even thought about such a thing, but simply believed him without doubt and with an open soul, and also did not always try to trust everyone as much as only him. He tried to hug her tightly, but at the same time, he also knew how to hurt someone quite badly with his words. The next day, she immediately asked how he felt after yesterday. Looking out the window, the girl understood that soon spring would come and all their plants would bloom and turn green. Therefore, she suggested that we wait for this moment and look at it together. It was then that he was ready to tell that the friend who was looking for him was from his childhood. He He then remembered his real mother, and also that his childhood was quite difficult, and it was his friend who looked after him in America. As a child, he could not find a place for himself. His father left Korea as soon as he found out that his mother was pregnant, but he supported her financially. But later, Mom was unable to take care of herself, but he tried to reassure her that they would be able to manage without their father. But she was so aggressive that she just wanted her child to disappear from her sight, since she blamed Yuna for everything. After that, he went to school, but he learned to keep quiet to assess situations before speaking. But he learned this precisely in order to survive. That's why he had only one friend. His father used to take them to baseball games all the time, and it was quite fun since there was no other entertainment. Then a friend was Yoon's only salvation, because it was with him that he could laugh like a child. But something terrible happened. The mother was taken away by an ambulance, and the little one was left alone. The man again began to remember his childhood, namely the moment when he himself sat in a corner and called his mother, who never came to him. Then the boy saw it with his own eyes and realized that it was the only thing left of his dead son, whom he would never see again in this world. The first thing he wanted to do was ask how the kid managed to survive in such bad conditions, but then he didn't say a word because he didn't know this man. After a second, he asked for some people to start entering this building, and then they, together with the boy, noticed many people quickly heading somewhere with boxes. He calmly observed everything, and only after a few minutes he wondered who was standing in front of him and why the man had come to this place. Then the stranger received a message that he was his grandfather, and the father of the little boy died in an accident that happened to him recently. After hearing such bad news about his dad, he decided to find out what happened to his mom. But as it turned out, she was alive but had to undergo rehabilitation in a clinic. After a second, he offered him a helping hand and also mentioned his name, and as a young man he always had to call him, and then he had no choice but to agree. At the moment he was very surprised. Because he didn't know how to react to it, he just calmly looked at the man and understood that it was the only way out of this situation. After a few days they arrived at a house, but at first the boy was not comfortable living in Korea because he had never lived there before, even though it was his father's native country. When they were walking along a path, the grandfather asked the little boy to be very careful, because here you could lose your balance at any moment. Turning his head, the grandfather emphasized the fact that now he was part of a big family, but he emphasized that you couldn't trust everyone here. Having joined a new company, he felt very bad because for this short period of time, a lot of grief happened to him that he could not survive alone. Now officially he had to become the child of this woman, even though he was not related to her. Then she greeted him politely and wanted to get to know this person better. Looking at each other, they could not say a word because in the beginning the boy did not trust anyone, and he also saw this person for the first time. Therefore, he was not comfortable. Stretching out his hand, she informed that from this moment on she will be Yunhwan's mother and will also be able to help him in all his endeavors. And the boy simply remained silent in response. The woman just continued to look at him sweetly because he was a nice boy, but she understood that at that moment it was difficult for him to make contact with someone. At the beginning, as soon as he arrived in Korea, he had to study the materials of books as well as the language because without it, it was impossible to exist in this country. After he already knew the Korean language well, the director of one school offered him to meet one of their students, to which he immediately agreed. A mother who saw how hard her son worked. She decided to bring him a delicious drink and also ask him to rest a little between tasks. He emphasized that everything was fine with him and he was fully prepared for such tests, although at times it was really difficult for me to read so much literature. She became for him the best mother that he could only dream of, but the young man still did not feel happy, and one day he noticed that, as it turned out, on the day when his father died and the woman lost her daughter. After learning such a shocking story, he began to feel very bad, because he understood that he was in such a position that he was simply replacing that girl. A second later, he received a call from an unfamiliar number, and it turned out to be his old friend with whom he kept in touch, who in turn congratulated him on his birthday, but the boy was still upset. Then the friend wanted to know when exactly he would be able to return to America, but the boy could not answer this question because the grandfather did not want to talk about it. For the whole next year, the boy tried to obey his grandfather, as well as pass all his work at school perfectly, and because of this, he decided to have a serious talk with him. Realizing that his grandson was now a much more mature person, he made the decision that Yunhwan now decided for himself where he would like to study in the future. Now the boy was incredibly happy. because he would be able to return to his mother, whom he had not seen for a long time, and also see old friends. When she opened the door a little, the woman saw her son, whom she had not seen for a whole year, and she simply could not contain her emotions of happiness. As it turned out, the happy days ended quickly, because his mother started taking drugs again, and a few days later she died. But it was Rick who blamed himself for her death, because he was with her that day. Although in reality, the young man did not blame his friend for the death of his mother, because he understood that this was a very important person for him who always helped in difficult moments. He thought that this was the only person he could trust very much, but one day he was wandering down the street, and after a few seconds he saw his friend. Noticing him with a bottle, the young man asked how much he drank, but the man thought it was unimportant, because no one was waiting for him at home anyway. When they started to conflict, then the friend began to say very offensive words towards the man, which he did not expect at all. He started talking about his parents' divorce, as well as all the life situations that weren't working out for him at that moment, but Yunhwan asked him to calm down. The guy didn't know how to react, because then his old friend did not stop saying insulting words at all, and with every minute he was getting worse and worse. Calming him down a little, he said that he would always be on his side and would be able to easily help him in all his endeavors and important matters that his husband wanted to implement. After a few years, they started talking together again, and then the man received a message that he was finally accepted into the university that he had wanted to enter for so long. But the friend still wanted to continue communicating with his friend and said that he could find a place to stay nearby, but the man said that he had to live in a dormitory. As a gift, he decided to let live in his house, which he could calmly dispose of, and then the man was really surprised by what he heard. Sitting on his feet, he was studying new subjects that the teacher told him, but at that moment the girl said that there would be a party not far from this place today. Then he saw on his phone that his friend did not answer at all. Because of this, he decided to visit his house to see what was there. As soon as he knocked on his door, he saw his friend who was not feeling well and said that he did not know that the young man wanted to come today. Then the man invited him to have fun because everyone wanted to see the young man with their own eyes and talk to him about something. As soon as he noticed that Yunhwan's face started to change, he finally told him to never invite anyone to his house again and also take care of his health because it was important. Meanwhile, people continued to have fun at his house, and also thought that they would not see the man because he was on his vacation, which he had planned for a long time. Afterwards, the people inside continued to have fun and discuss their lives, but at that moment they noticed that someone was standing next to them. When the man entered his house, he said that he had already discussed this topic with a friend, and then asked him not to bring anyone here again because he did not allow it. After getting to his feet, the friend began to speak rudely to him and thought that he was simply reminding him that he did not have any friends and he could not spend his time with them so coolly. Noticing such a handsome guy, the girls decided to invite him to their place to talk with him because they thought that their company was a little sad. But he did not pay any attention even to beautiful girls. Therefore, he simply turned around and went about his business because he thought that he did not want to be in such an atmosphere. Having come to his room, he immediately began to read a book, and he was pleased that no one touched him at the moment when he just wanted to be alone. After some time, he became ashamed of his behavior, because he remembered his friend who was with him in the most difficult times. That's why I didn't know what to do with him. Turning his head to the other side, he saw a girl who was just lying on the carpet and did not show any signs of life at all. At that moment, he felt incredible stress on himself and did not know how to deal with panic attacks that simply began to break his head in two. Waking up from some noises, the friend asked what his friend was doing with the girl because he did not understand what was happening at that moment. After calling the police and an ambulance, he just stood and looked out the window and watched as the woman's body was simply taken away in some cars. The comrade began to comment on the fact that he did not remember everything that happened, and also thought that he would never have hurt anyone in his life, even if he was drunk. Lowering his eyes, he already had an assumption that there was no difference who was guilty and who was not, because this situation really became incredibly difficult for him. Grabbing his head, Rick now did not understand what would happen to him in the future. Because what I was most worried about right now was the woman's life, which was now under great question. Approaching his friend, he wanted to have a normal conversation with him, and also asked once again if he did not remember anything at all. He, in turn, began to emphasize that he was too drunk to remember anything, and also thought that the woman could have hurt herself because she had mental problems. The hero was incredibly impressed by his colleague's answer, because he thought that he would be able to remember something from that evening, but not hearing any information, he was very surprised. When the young man was at the police station, then the policeman emphasized that his friend reported that he saw young man attack the woman with a knife. The enraged hero simply could not control his emotions, because he understood that at that moment his friend had simply deceived him very much, and it could not be true. Once he was at home, he began to look around the area to find something because he thought that it was necessary to find some evidence that could prove that he could not bear it in this situation. After some time, he still managed to find a phone lying right in front of his eyes, and then he made an assumption that it could be his friend's phone. After looking through all the records that were there at that moment, he realized that there was something to work on, so he wanted to study the information in more detail. Having familiarized himself with some text that was in the phone, he made an assumption that someone really wanted to set him up, but the man did not understand why. When they had an opportunity to talk again in private, the first thing Yunhwan asked his friend was why he gave a truthful statement to the police. After sitting with his partner for a while, he realized that he didn't want to give him any answers to his questions, and after a second he turned around and just walked away. A second later, a policeman entered the room and informed him that he could not calmly leave the room, and then the young man could not believe his ears. As it turned out, his friend later decided to change his testimony, and then the hero became incredibly interested in what exactly the young man had said to the police, but they could not tell him. A few minutes later, he was already in his car and did not know how to react to all this because the events in his life unfolded incredibly quickly. He ended up in a car with his old man who helped him get out of the police station, but didn't say anything in return. Then the young man did not want to. Calmly continuing to look down, he was only in his thoughts and tried to figure out who benefited from framing him so strongly in such a situation. Arriving at his destination, the man said that if the young man would be with him for 7 years, he would be able to give him everything that he wanted so much. He looked in his direction for a long time and wanted to get at least some kind of answer to his question, but the hero wanted to think it all over himself and still decided to agree. When the girl listened to this whole story, she was simply incredibly amazed and did not know how to react to it normally, because she understood that it was very interesting. After some time, he decided to come after the woman he had dreamed of all his life, but he had no guarantee that she would agree to marry him. In any case, he believed that Rick spoke to her only about the events of the past, so the young man believed that there was no need to emphasize them too much. Turning his head to the bride, he noticed how she began to cry a lot, but he did not understand what this reaction was related to. Later, she decided to lay her head on his body and wanted someone to pity her, because her emotional state at that moment wished for better. After a moment, she began to recall her relationship with an old friend of the young man, and then he asked if she even understood whom she was marrying. That day, she heard a lot of negative words about her fiancé, and the man wanted to convey his position using some force. Later, the man noticed that something was wrong with the woman and then asked what happened to her, but she did not want to tell this story. They recalled events from their past lives, because before, everything seemed different to them, and the young man really wanted to be transferred to these events. When several days passed, they decided to come to dinner at the company, which discussed the details of the company, as well as their personal life, and the woman also wanted to be there. Then she asked that no one give them anything at all for the wedding. Meanwhile, parents have already received special letters inviting them to such an important event. They were incredibly happy that they would still be able to attend the wedding of their loved ones, and they also wanted to give them something very good. The worker decided to talk to Yemen personally and asked whether, when they met together at the park, whether they had already met the manager. After a few minutes, one of them noticed that the manager was not around, and then he wanted to know where he had gone from their affairs. They wanted to find out where their leader could be as soon as possible, and they also wanted to know what the work schedule was supposed to be for the following Sunday. Reading the messages that were written on these discoveries, they were a little surprised, because they learned more information about the husband's family. After a second, he found the right man who was written about on the internet. Then he wanted to find out more information about him, because he thought that the female workers must know him. Then they realized that something was wrong with the manager's family, because there were a lot of little things that they didn't quite understand. After hearing all these stories, she emphasized that she was not very close to the person they were talking about, so she did not want to mention it. In the end, they decided to apologize to her, and she, in turn, emphasized that everything was in order because she knew that people were just interested in learning something. Lowering her head, the worker apologized to the girl, but she still wanted to find out the necessary information because it was incredibly important to her. Sipping her drink, she remembered all the lousy situations that were connected together with Yemen and understood that her father was also somehow involved in this. A woman who stood next to her and emphasized that her loved one was supposed to have a wedding today. Therefore, they had to prepare well for him. But for some reason, the sister was not very pleased. She was going to answer her questions or something else. So she simply asked her friend to continue doing her makeup and not say anything superfluous. And after a second, she turned her head and emphasized that a woman should not stick her nose into other people's affairs, because she thought that it had nothing to do with her at all. The mother decided to approach her daughter and also discuss with her some details of their work, because she saw how difficult it was for her to gather her thoughts that day. The little girl began to emphasize that she did not want to go to the wedding at all. Therefore, she asked her mother to tell everyone that she was just sick. But unfortunately, the mother said that she could not do that in any case, and she also did not understand everything that was just happening before their eyes. But then she decided to encourage her daughter and emphasized that soon the newlyweds who wanted to get married would regret their decision. And then the smile did not disappear from her face for a long time, because she realized that she still had at least some chance to reconnect her life with the manager. As it turned out, the mother made this plan a long time ago, because she always treated her other daughter better and wanted a better future for her. The most she wanted to do to her future son-in-law was to make it so that he would lose his entire company and be without money, and then no one would need him. After listening to her mother's advice, she now understood that only her would be obeyed because she really offered her a good option on how to turn these events around. At the end, she asked her daughter to behave politely, and she in turn agreed because now she understood what she could get in the future. When the worker returned to do her work again, she asked if she could start doing her hair, but then her mother asked her for one favor. After listening to all the wishes of the woman, she realized that the main one wanted to do the best makeup at this wedding in order to look prettier than everyone else. Meanwhile, the newlyweds wanted to exchange rings. After reading the oath, the man said that he will be with the woman for the rest of his life, despite all the events that will happen in their lives, and will make her the happiest. Hearing his words of oath, she immediately turned her head towards him and now looked only at the man, because I wanted to hear the long-awaited answer. At the end, he spoke very important words for her. Namely, the man emphasized that he will love her until the end of his life, no matter what, and regardless of the events that will happen in their lives. At the moment, it seemed to him that she was very worried, but the girl did not support such assumptions and emphasized that she was fully prepared for this event. Smiling in response, he put a ring on her hand, and now they were officially man and woman, and then people remembered this day for a very long time. Turning her head, the girl saw a lot of relatives who were with her that day, and she also saw people who were not very pleasant to her that day, but she could not do anything about it. My sister was also present that day and watched everything carefully. Therefore, she was a little worried because she saw how the love of her life was getting married. Closing her eyes, she could not convey her feelings to anyone, because now she was a real queen, about whom she had only read in fairy tales in her childhood. Raising his head, he thought that their union would be without any emotions, but it was not so, because the man did not expect that it would become such an important event for him. People sitting next to me always discussed the man who got married. Then some girls had an assumption that he was quite a handsome man whom everyone liked. One of the employees was carefully watching the newlyweds and understood that something was wrong here, so he wanted to find out as soon as possible the whole truth that he thought was being hidden from him. After their wedding, he sat in one place for a long time and understood that the manager could not remain a good person for a long time. Therefore, he was sure that soon he had to show his true face. But then the girl carefully watched all the events unfolding and could not hold back her tears, because at that moment the emotions were overwhelming. Noticing all this, the partner decided to turn to her and told her that today was a very happy day, but for some reason she was very upset. He recommended her to smile more often, because he believed that it is a smile that gives a person positive emotions. Then it really didn't matter to him who married whom. He just liked the atmosphere in the hall that reigned around him that day. The girl was very worried before the wedding, because she saw how many people there were, and because of that it was sometimes very uncomfortable for her to feel it on herself. Grandfather asked to enter her room and asked if she was not very tired that day, because he understood that a wedding is quite an emotionally exhausting event. He wished the newlyweds to live happily ever after and forever remain the good people he knows them to be at the moment. Getting up from the couch, she looked into his eyes and told him that everything would be just like that, because she was sure of her fiancé and thought that everything would work out for her. Then he told the story that the manager was quite an interesting guy, that he often did strange things, but he still thought that it was his woman with whom he wanted to spend his life. Later, the grandfather remarked that he would always help them, and that suited the girl very well. Hearing such pleasant words in her direction, she was incredibly grateful, and also noted that she would do everything to make her husband the happiest in the world. And then something happened that they did not expect. Then the girl saw her fiancé standing behind her grandfather, but she thought that they must not have seen each other. Then he politely asked if he could go to his bride, and also wanted to give her some gift that he was holding in his hands and wanted to present to her as soon as possible. When the ceremony ended, the girl breathed her last, because she was very tired from all these events that happened in her life, and her husband suggested that she rest a little. Looking at her fiancé, she wanted to tell him something, but she wasn't sure if the man needed this information, so she didn't know how to act. Having adjusted her thoughts, she reported that she saw a familiar person at her wedding, but she could not understand who it was. She agreed with his husband's assumptions, but could not clearly formulate her thoughts, because she was very worried, but the groom thought that it was not necessary to do this. After a second, the man's face changed dramatically and said that the girl had already started looking at other men, but they had only recently signed up. Raising her hands, she emphasized that this was not the case at all, because she simply noticed a familiar person and did not see anything wrong with it. But as it turned out, the man was just joking with the girl again, and she took it all seriously, and she didn't like it a little, because she thought that they were talking to her seriously. Then the groom remarked that he liked her only when she was very angry, because he thought she was very cute when she acted like that. In a few minutes, he said that they were going to the airport to fly to the long-awaited vacation, but the girl was simply stunned by such news, because she did not expect that she had a rest. As soon as the man noticed that his bride had opened her eyes, he immediately asked how she was feeling, but then she did not know what to answer him, because she had just woken up. Orienting herself where she was, she saw her partner in front of her who was calmly drinking wine and watching her carefully, getting out of bed a little. She did not quite understand what was happening, because at first it seemed to her that it was some kind of dream, but only later she understood that it was reality itself. Then he began to remember how he himself asked the girl to go to bed, but she did not want to listen to him at all. And after the man's story, she herself remembered this story. After some time, he brought her a special box and asked her to wear this thing that was in it, and then she really thought about such an offer. Having received the box in her hands, at first she did not understand what could be there, but she had an assumption that it was most likely some kind of thing. As it turned out, the man wanted her to wear this dress, because he could not see him properly during the ceremony, because he simply did not pay attention to him. It was not a problem for her to wear this dress again, especially since she understood that it looked very good on her body, so she decided to wear it right away. As soon as the young man noticed her in this dress, he simply could not contain his emotions, because his woman looked incredibly beautiful in it. After looking at her a little more, he began to give her a lot of compliments, because once again he was convinced that he had chosen a very beautiful person who suited him as a wife. Unfortunately, she could not put on this dress herself, so she asked her husband to help her a little, and he willingly agreed to do it, because he understood that it was difficult for her. Unable to hold back his emotions, he began to hug her tightly, because he simply could not help but enjoy her beauty, which reigned in the girl that day. Looking into her eyes, he once again emphasized that she looked very beautiful in it, and was one of the most beautiful girls he had ever seen in this world. At that, Yunhwan couldn't stop saying nice words to her and also started kissing her because his emotions were overwhelming him at that moment. At the moment, the girl emphasized that she simply did not want to kiss because she was very afraid that she would somehow spoil her dress because she valued it very much. After some time when they were already lying in bed, he decided to ask her if everything was okay because he could see that the girl was a little worried. But she in turn emphasized that everything was in order, because she just didn't know what would happen in the future. She was a little worried. After some time, he offered her to go to the sea, and even then the woman was a little surprised, because she wanted to go there herself, but she did not know if it was normal, because it was already late. Before the walk, he also asked her to wear this dress again because he thought he wanted to see such a beautiful dress on his bride once more. As soon as they went outside, they immediately began to admire such landscapes, because the woman had never been near the sea before and she thought it was very beautiful. When she got closer to the water, she was scared because she almost wet her beautiful dress, which she was so afraid of getting wet. Then the man asked her not to worry so much, but the woman thought that she knew, she rented it, so she was afraid to somehow spoil it, and then the man noticed that it was now her dress. She was incredibly surprised by such news, because she thought that her husband had rented it. Then she began to thank him incredibly for such an act. Holding hands, she was once again convinced that she had chosen the right man for her future life, because from all sides he seemed just perfect to her. At that moment, he saw how she twisted her leg a little and fell a little, although the heroine herself noted that she was completely fine because it was all sand. Smiling sweetly, she was laughing at herself, because for the first time in her life she tripped so inappropriately, but she thought that there was nothing like that, so she just started laughing,